Welcome back to Fear and Beer, a Halloween Horror Nights podcast. Join us as we venture year-round into the fog.
Make sure you give us a like and a follow on your podcast platform of choice. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube page where we upload every episode in its video format, and maybe a few other surprises as well.
Make sure you're following us on social media to keep up to date with our newest haunted content.
I'm Nick.
I'm Seamus.
I'm Jamie.
The gang's all here. HHN 33, recap, final rankings, bidding adieu to another season in the fog. Let's put this thing to rest. We'll still be talking about it, but this is really our final thoughts. We've had a little bit of time since the event wrapped up to kind of collect all of our thoughts, see what people were saying about it, and discuss it in I'm falling all over my words. As a whole, we can discuss it as a whole. Now that it's in the rearview mirror, we can view it as one big thing versus trying to nitpick it while it's still in operations. We can see what we thought was going to change, what didn't change, and what worked, what didn't work, and all that stuff. But we're going to recap this whole thing tonight. But first, I think we should just do a little thanks for the season, a send-off, because this was, just even if the event, which we'll get into, even if we don't think it is completely like one of our favorite events, it still was such a fun time. And all of you that listen and watch, come to our events, all of you are the reasons why it can make a lesser event feel better. I had so much fun this year just getting to meet all of you in person, doing some houses here and there, grabbing some drinks, just hanging out, shooting the shit. It really makes the season that much more better for us, for me at least. It's such a memorable time for me. I have 2 months of happiness. I just crammed 2 months of enjoying it. I know towards the end, Jamie is like, "You're seriously going to Horror Nights again tonight?" And I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Well, who's going?" I was like, "I don't care. I don't know. I just enjoy being there. I enjoy running into people." And that's just kind of the fun part of this thing. It's just, it really has grown from this tiny little thing me and Seamus did into this much bigger family. And it's just so cool to like put names to faces of little, avatar icons or whatever your default picture is on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But, just running in, I don't even have a list of all the people we ran into this year, but it was a lot. And every year it progressively gets more and more. And it still surprises me that much every year when somebody's like, "Oh, Fear and Beer," or "Hey, Nick," like, that's right. I do put myself out there. People will randomly, say hi to you. It's bound to happen in some way, shape, or form. So just thank you to all the fans that really made the season for us. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to speak on that at all.
I feel like you said that was really, really well said. I feel like you kind of hit everything, and just, thanks to everyone. As Nick was saying too, I just think it's crazy that I always say that to them. I was like, I still think it's crazy that people listen, let alone like want to come up and like meet us and stuff. It's fun. And everyone is, I don't know, this year, like you said, it did feel different, but this year was very memorable as well. We met a lot of cool people, a lot of cool firsts that we did. So it was really nice.
Yeah, you said, I think, everything that I would want to say. So,
Nick,
and then
the moderator.
Right. And then a huge thank you to everybody involved with Halloween Horror Nights, whether that's from, characters to creative directors to art and design to makeup and costume. You truly, I couldn't work those hours. I would not be able to be like, "Oh yeah, you're in line for Insidious and it's 2:25 in the morning. Get the fuck out of my house." Like, no chance. I'd be gone. There would be no red lipstick demon. There would be no bride in black. I would be gone. Sorry, but I'm just not that kind of, I don't have that patience to wait around. So thank you for, kind of putting your life on pause for 2 months just for us to enjoy this silly little event. I can't even imagine the toll it takes on just about every aspect of your health, your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, all of that. I just can't imagine it. And you do it for us, right? You don't do it for, I can't imagine you're doing it for the money. I imagine you're doing it for the love of the event, the love of acting, the love of the fans. So again, if any of you are listening, thank you so much for allowing us to have an event like this where we can talk about year round, because that's just, again, something I could not be able to do. I'd love to be on the back seat, the backstage aspect of that, writing some stuff and whatnot. But as far as being boots on the ground and being in those positions, I could not do it myself. That's for sure. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that was involved before we really get started in dissecting this event. Any notes on that as well? I guess before we'll get into what we're drinking and what we think about this event as a whole.
Nick pretty much summed it up, but really, you guys do make the event. Everyone, the creators, the designers, the show directors, the scare actors, everyone. So, and working those long hours, we into the night. I'm usually in bed by 10 or 10:30 myself, so I could only imagine how tough that is on you guys working these hours for us, and still with us being those people running house at the last minute of the night and still giving it your all is just so wonderful every time. So it's nice because I'm like, man, I feel pretty bad. It's like going to a restaurant when they're closing like last minute. You're like, oh, I feel bad. I promise we'll be quick. But yeah, thank you again to you guys. Even though I do feel bad, but you guys still give it your all, which is amazing, especially at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really say much else. So you guys are the best. You give us a reason to look forward to the fall, and even if we don't get the same fall weather that we're used to, there's still something to look forward to, at the end of the year. So yeah, thank you for doing everything you do. It's easy for us to sit here and just talk on a microphone, but you guys do the real work. You're the real soldiers. So from the bottom of my heart, you give me something to look forward to. So thank you very much.
Alrighty, let's get into some drinks, because I did stop. I picked up some beers, and I figured this one was sort of fitting. This is from Threes Brewing, which is out. It's a little micro out in Brooklyn, New York. It is a Mosaic Double IPA. It's got blueberry kush, ripe melon, pineapple juice, and dank. But
Blueberry kush.
It is called Twisted Thoughts, which we're going to be giving a lot of thoughts today on this episode. So I figured it was fitting. I figured it was fitting. I definitely had to stop and grab some beers. I've kind of taken down most of my fall stack at this point, so I figured time to re-up. Let's get back into the beer drinking game. Let's get some new stuff going and let's enjoy. So interesting smell off the nose, but I'm sure it'll we'll see, I guess.
That was a nice pour.
It was. You definitely get a lot of the blueberry. It's good. It doesn't taste. The dank is on the back end, but it's not. As a double IPA, it's not too crazy. I think it's only like 8% or something like that. But yeah, that's what I'm drinking. Anybody got anything tonight?
No, nothing special. Just my usual.
The silver bullet, the warrior.
I should have asked Nick to grab me something, so no, I'm not drinking anything tonight. But I should be taking a break on the drinking anyway for right now. So
little post Horror Nights purge is usually what I do, but I feel like I didn't go too crazy. Usually I kind of gauge my weight, and I'm like, you know what? I don't have to go on a harsh post HHN diet this year. I did good. I maintained it. Maybe I was walking around more. Maybe it was those tents in the back. I don't know, but. All right, so let's dissect this a little bit. I think before we get to our rankings, which will be at the end, let's just start out with like the simplest of simples, right? Let's just talk about some highs and lows of the event, and then we can kind of get into a different discussion as to why everybody and their mother are saying HHN 33 felt different. So I think we just go around the horn and give us your highs, and then we'll kind of talk about the lows. And I guess, again, before we get into any discussion of this, everybody can like something different, right? We're not here to yuck your yum. If we don't like something that you liked or vice versa, it's not an attack on anybody. It's just our personal thoughts. Maybe something spoke to us in a different way. It didn't speak to you. That's totally okay. And as far as like gauging houses and, if we say, so-and-so, I didn't really like that. We don't really take, actually not really. We don't take the people that are on the ground, like the characters and stuff like that, into consideration on this stuff. I'm talking simply, the idea, how it was executed as a house or a scare zone, are there easier or better ways that probably could have elevated this property and they just didn't do that? I'd say across the board, the characters have always made what they have better. So it's not by any wrongdoing on their part. This is all strictly by the decisions above them, the powers to be. Either something wasn't there when we thought it should be, whatever. But it's just our thoughts. There's no rhyme or reason. We're not writing the law on this. This is not the be all end all. But I do think it should be stated that we're gonna have critiques on some stuff, and that's okay. You're allowed to do that, and maybe we'll talk about something you don't like, and that's fine. It spoke to you better. But these are just our opinions. So I guess with that being said, let's start with the good stuff. So Jamie, what's a high that you had for this year?
I actually took some notes this time, so let me pull it up real quick. I should have had it pulled up already.
Well, strap in because it's gonna be a long one tonight, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's not jinx it. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But okay, what should I start off with? I know what to start off with. That's a good one. The Dead Coconut Club was definitely one of
Okay.
my highs this year. This was my not necessarily in Horror Nights, I guess, but still part of Horror Nights. This was my first time, at least, going to any sort of iteration of the Cursed Coconut Club, Dead Coconut Club, the ones they've had in the past, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so much fun. I love the theming. The Blumhouse bar was really cool. There's a lot of photo ops, and personally, I think some of the drinks that they had here I kind of liked better than the alcoholic mixed drinks that they had in HHN. So that was a nice addition as well.
Yeah, the dead coconut was really fun.
So
I
much
liked the
fun.
I liked the split because it didn't feel they weren't infringing upon each other. It was very
Yeah.
distinctly two different bars. And you liked the Blumhouse, which is fine. I like that stuff. It was pretty cool up there, but I loved
Mhm.
the bottom part. That
I love
whole
both. It was
vibe
like
of
a
that.
vampire nightclub.
It was so cool. It was very well
Mhm.
done. I popped my head in once or twice last year when you had like the Metalunia mutant, and I
Mhm.
like that sci-fi kind of stuff too. But I think most would agree this is probably the best one that they've done so far. So
Mhm.
that's up there for high as well for me. So,
Mhm.
Seamus, what was a high for you?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, I think for me, this is gonna sound stupid, but I feel like most of the scare zones weren't affected by the things they're usually affected by. At least from what I
Hmm.
have usual problems with. Like for example, um, Swamp of the Undead wasn't entirely inundated with fog or smoke, so it actually was enjoyable to spend some time in there, or at least take your time going through it. You weren't just trying to power your way through, so you didn't like run into people. Demon Queens was lit pretty well. It wasn't super overly dark. Um, there weren't pockets of or aspects of it that you couldn't really see, like you could like last year. And the chainsaws not being in it was a big plus.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a high for me, as well as keeping the chainsaws up front. I know you got to have them, but if they stay there and I don't got to deal with them anywhere else, that's to me that's a positive. So
It's a huge win. I had for my one of my highs. I put IPs. I think this was a resurgence of IPs this year. I don't think we had the going into it. I don't think we had the highest expectations because the IP list wasn't really setting the world on fire. But I don't I don't think that they under delivered by any means. I mean, I think Insidious is one of the top IPs that we've had in a very long time. I think Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was done very, very well. I think that I'm already like forgetting some of them. Quiet Place, I think, we'll get into a Quiet Place a little bit later, but I think that overall the IP houses, there wasn't a miss, really. Whether you like A Quiet Place or not, that's more of a personal thing. But I wouldn't define it as a miss by any means, as opposed to, in past years, we've kind of had one or two that where it's like, okay, we can, just doesn't hit for me. So I thought they did well for their IPs. So, Jamie, do you have any more? What other things did you put under your highs?
Okay. I was trying to pick which one I did. I actually liked that they had, I mean, maybe it wasn't a great thing for them, but the merch went on sale pretty early this year. A lot earlier than it usually does, which saved me a little bit of money here and there. But then, of course, I can't wait. And I got things when it was 30%, and then it went to 50, and then 70, and I screwed myself in that aspect. But I think that was nice too, which kind of leads me to maybe that the merch wasn't as personally, there wasn't anything that I was like dying for that I needed this year. Some of the stuff was cool, but maybe that's why it went on sale because it wasn't doing as well. But I like a little nice early sale. I think that's great.
That's a
Get that
consumer
inventory out of
high.
there. Right.
Yeah, it's a consumer high and a universal low.
Mm-hmm.
Seamus, other
Oh,
highs for you?
go ahead.
Um, I didn't really give this much thought, so sorry. I was not prepared for this part of
You can
the episode,
piggyback on some
but
of ours because I have two more.
I was going to say, I have a
um,
couple more too.
yeah, Jamie, I know you were about to
I
say
was
something else, so why
gonna
don't you do that and then I'll think about it.
So one good thing, kind of with the merch, I guess it goes hand in hand. Tribute store. We'll get into that later too. But the treats that they had in the tribute store this year, the little dessert items, I really enjoyed. I feel like a lot of the sweet treats that they had this year, I liked more than some of the savory food items that they had, and I feel like they had a lot of variety with that. I think I don't know if you ended up trying yours that I got you, but the major sweets, the chocolate chili
Oh,
macaroon,
I did have that. Yep.
delectable, delicious. I'd gotten the purple Ghostbusters like coated marshmallow s'mores from the tribute store. That was good too. The Major Sweets pumpkin caramel I ended up trying and I threw it away. I took a bite out of it for people who are knowing how it was. I almost broke a tooth and it didn't taste very pumpkiny. I don't know, it wasn't very good, so I threw it away. But other than that, I liked a lot of the treats in the tribute store this year too. I feel like the theming was really fun. They were decorated really nice and they tasted good. So that was a
Yeah.
high.
All right.
This is kind of silly, but I think for the most part, there wasn't any real incredibly extreme wait for anything. I mean, obviously, I don't go on Saturdays, so I don't really know what Saturdays are like. But
That's true.
outside of Saturdays, I mean, Fridays were the worst, but they really, even then, weren't awful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't feel like there was ever a wait where I felt it was unnecessarily long. So
And
I think that was kind of a nice bonus.
I feel like a lot of the times too, they were projected at a higher weight than what they were. Because even I'd be like,
Yeah.
it could be like, oh, you want to go wait for triplets or something? And I'm like, 50 minutes. And then it would only take us like 20 minutes, which was nice. So,
Yeah, I think they spread it out pretty well. I don't think we got, and maybe that's a part of a discussion later, but I
mhm.
don't think we ever got those crazy times. Obviously, Insidious and A Quiet Place did reach, in the hundreds or so, 120s, but it was never like the 180s and that was always prime time. That was always 8 o'clock. It's what else do you expect at that point? So, but other than that, everybody else seemed pretty even across the board. It wasn't like, this is 15 minutes and then everything else is 120. Like it was pretty spread out, I'd say, as far as wait times go. But one of my highs was the new tents. I love that new setup over there. I love
Mhm.
being able to, I know that the pathway, I mean, I'd say shorter than the walk was last year from that to Oddfellow tent because you'd still have to wrap all the way behind and take a right and jump into where Slaughter's line was. But the fact that you get more bang for your buck, there's bathrooms down there, there's a bar, there's
The
two
bathrooms are nice.
houses. It was a great addition to like create an extra pocket of HHN, so
Mhm.
you justify that walk a little bit more. And I
And it
only
didn't
hope
seem as
us
bad.
no.
No.
And the tents themselves are huge. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I I think, and this is just me hypothesizing, that they did not fill those tents as much as they could have. I think because they're new tents, I don't know if they either didn't have the time or weren't sure how it was going to work out, so they didn't go crazy with the scale. I think, obviously there's some stuff in Goblins that's pretty tall, but I think with those tents, they do have the ability to stretch it either wider or longer or higher. It looks so big from the outside. And I would love to see a full on lights on tour of like the perimeter of the tent inside to see where everything is and how much space is kind of not touched. But it does feel like those could have been utilized a little bit more, and that goes with being the first year in there. They don't know how much they
Mhm.
can really play with. So I think the new tents are a huge addition. I hope that they stay there. I hope this is a thing that's moving forward for us. But I put that as one of the highs.
Mhm.
And anybody else have any other highs? Because I have one more.
I have kind of two more. Kind of back to like the food and drinks and stuff. I feel like there's a lot more, I guess they listened to the surveys or whatever. There's a lot more drink tents this year and drink carts, and there was a lot of more themed drinks versus just the ghoul juice, even though they still had the ghoul juice this year. A lot more themed drinks, a lot more mocktail themed drinks, which was nice. Probably two of the best drinks I had was at the Dead Coconut Club, that factory made fear drink that we
Mhm.
had with the little sour candies in it were really good, and then the Blood Moon Punch. Another thing I was going to say was there was a lot of photo ops this year. I love a good photo op, and I feel like there was a lot of photo opportunities this year.
They did make that very abundantly clear, especially in the Dead
Yeah.
Coconut with like the little bat wings, the
Yeah.
neon bat wings and stuff like that.
Even in the scare
But
zones and stuff like that, I feel like I took more photos in Plum zone this year than I did
Blum
any
Zone.
year. Blum zone.
Yep. Seamus, any other highs for you off the top?
Um, I think you guys, I mean, covered everything that I would have added to my list. I think for the most part, the food were good. The food items were good. They had a lot of unique items. They weren't anything that felt like overused. I mean, again, it's not really a high. I wish there was more drink options, but
Mhm.
other than that, it was a
There wasn't a
pretty
lot of different beers this year, though. A lot more
beers or
cocktails this
even mixed
year.
drinks. They really,
Yeah.
really. I mean, the
A lot
cocktails
of the
weren't
same.
incredibly varied either.
Mhm.
Um, but otherwise, it was fine for the most part. Yeah, but I mean, as far as other like high points, I think you guys nailed a lot of what I would add to the list.
Yeah. Uh, Jamie, why don't you go? Because I have one more. So that way, I think you said you have two, so we can kind of alternate
Yeah.
there.
I was just going to say none of the houses were really bad this year, with
Yeah.
maybe one kind of out by itself, but we'll get to that. I'll talk about that later. But I feel like genuinely a lot of them had good detail to it. Like they were fun. I think they were well thought out, well done. There was some themes that they've wanted to use before, like how we talked about in the Six House Tour episode, the Goblin's Feast idea that's been kind of swirling around for 10 or 12 years, however long it was. So I really liked the houses overall. And usually for me being a big IP girl, I did enjoy the IPs this year, but I really,
Daisy.
really enjoyed some of the originals. What's he doing?
Yeah.
Our
I don't
dog
know.
is
Daisy's just walking
on the
around the
hunt.
corner. I don't know what she's doing. Uh, so from one of my other highs, I had the scarectors. I feel like they're high every year, but this year
Yeah.
in particular, I think there were a couple places, whether that's houses or scare zones, that probably felt underwhelming to receive as a like character, and you wouldn't be able to tell that. Everybody was giving it their all. I never felt shorted by an actor in their role. So I just think that maybe it's because every year it was like whether it's the scenic in a house or the story in a house you're so excited for. But in this one, there's been a couple that I was like, it's okay. But then I keep going through it or to it because of the actors in those roles. So I think that was another high for me. So Jamie, why don't you give your other high? I'm gonna go figure out what Daisy's so fixated on in the corner.
I think that was kind of like the last one I had. I kind of compiled a couple of the other ones into the other, but I could talk about some of it more if you want me to. That's okay. What did I
No,
not
it's
talk
fine. We
about? Or we could go on to the lows. I could start off
Yeah,
our lows if you want
let's get
to
into our
see what she's
lows. So
doing.
yeah, why don't you kick us off with your first low, and I'll pick up where you're at.
Okay, some of our lows. I've seen a lot of people on social media saying the same thing, a lot harsher than I am because I give everything the benefit of doubt. And especially with the scare actors, like Nick was saying earlier, too, it's tough when you get put into some of these roles or some of these positions that you're in and it not being ideal or what would you'd like. But not saying this has anything to do with you guys whatsoever because you guys always give 100%. But I just feel like the lack of scare zone presence was a little forgettable this year. I feel like, for example, Swamp of the Undead, that Central Park little area is probably one of my favorite scare zone walkthroughs to have it at. And I feel like I didn't really spend much time there this year as I usually try to. I feel like it wasn't really as standoutish for me. Um, Duality of Fear, I feel like kind of just got lost in the wind towards, I think it was the last night we ended up seeing it that they had a bunch of different characters from some of the other zones in it as well, some from Demon Queens and some from Torture Fair. And I wish they had just done that the whole season because it definitely would have made sense for the theming that they were going with, but that just fell a little flat for me as well. Torture Fair and Demon Queens were good, and I would say the Blumhouse Scare Zone did growing on me over the season because the character interactions were really fun. And like I said, I did take a lot of photos at that Scare Zone with the grabbers. So, Nick, for you getting back on, I was talking about
Scare zones.
kind of the lack of Scare Zone presence, some of them being a little unforgettable. Yeah.
That was my number
Or
one low
being
was
forgettable. I'm sorry, not unforgettable.
my number one low was in quotation marks 5 scare zones because
Yeah.
it really wasn't. If we're being honest, it really wasn't scare zones or 5 of them. Duality of Fear had such a ability to do something cool, and they kind of just took the easy way out and chose not to. Especially selling us on the fact where it's like you get to choose if it's sinister or whatever, like however they worded it. But it was like there's 2 pathways leading to different zones. You very easily could have themed, a couple, 30 feet going either way, as one being red for sinister, one being purpley for surreal, and leading into Demon Queens and Torture Fair. It would have just made that much of a difference. But yeah, that was what I was going to say for my first low. But Seamus, any lows for you?
Um. mm, I mean, it felt like some. I mean, some of the event did feel a little rushed, or it felt not as loved as it has in the past. I think the scare zones were weak this year. I think overall they were weaker. Not to say they were bad, but compared to the last couple of seasons, I think this year it's just they did what they could. But I feel like a lot of these ideas were kind of just like we got to come up with something, and they all kind of like had their high points, but also had some of their low points too. And Blumhouse definitely felt completely tacked on. And it had, again, it like the others had its moment, but otherwise it was relatively weak. Other than that, though, I don't really have a ton of low points, to be honest with you. I mean, I think a lot of people are down on it just because it definitely felt phoned in somewhat. Compared to previous seasons, but at the same time, phoning in something at Universal is like the best year most of the theme parks have ever. You know what I mean? So like the worst year at a Universal event could be the best year it's at SeaWorld or wherever. Because it's, again, Universal still goes balls to the wall even with a lower budget.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think for me, it's like, I don't understand as much why the hate is there. I get why people were disappointed. So I understand being disappointed, but like to be vitriolic about it, it's strange to me because like they still go and go all out when they can, and they do as best they can with what they have.
Yeah.
And trust me, because I went to SeaWorld for the first time this year. It was very fun, but you can't compare the two.
Yeah.
Sorry, you just can't. But no, I really don't have a ton of lows, like lows, like things I should be like mad about. I think there were a couple houses that I weren't excited about, and my rankings will show that. But even then, I still appreciate the work that goes into it.
Yeah, it really is. You get spoiled, right? It's very easy to say that this was a down year, or if it was rushed, or it looked cheap. It's easy to say that when you only go to Halloween Horror Nights, because if you only went to local or different haunts and you came to 33, you'd be like, this is insane. This is ridiculous. They pulled this off at a haunted house. Like, it's crazy. But for someone that maybe only goes to Halloween Horror Nights as a haunt, and you see like a very small dip, you're like, oh, the sky is falling. the world is like, this is crazy. What are they doing here? They're not spending any money. It's like, no, no, no. Trust me, they're still spending money. Like, I assure you, they are spending money. And yeah, some of my lows are more nitpicky than anything. Like my second low was the tribute store cohesiveness with the zone. I don't think that dumpster ended up working. You know, we gave it a chance, but it really stuck out like a sore thumb. It didn't make sense. And even though inside the tribute store looked kind of cool, it's still, I didn't
No.
get it. It was like a Batricia invasion bunker thing. I don't know.
No clue.
Again, they tried something. I can commend them for that, but I didn't really vibe with it. I don't know. Maybe just from the get go of it being the dumpster out in a torture Ren fair, that kind of set it apart. But like past years, like even if it doesn't, the inside doesn't have to do with the zone. The outsides are pretty, I don't want to say basic because they're detailed, but like, you know, you have a spooky looking house facade, or, you know, the lucky cat mouth entrance. Like it still fit. It didn't just like giant dumpster. Here you go, tribute store. So that was a little bit of a low for me.
And
Yeah.
you bring up something that you remind me of something that I did want to say, is that the tribute store, for all that it does well this year, I don't know why, but it felt so much more congested. It was not laid out well.
Yeah.
Felt very tight. Felt that there wasn't a lot of space to move, especially when you first walk in that first room with all the Ghostbuster stuff.
Very
Like,
oddly set up.
and the worst part is, like, people want to stop and look at things, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I felt
But
like I couldn't.
it causes like such a traffic jam when it's busy, that it makes like not. I almost didn't want to go in the tribute store this year just because it was like it's too claustrophobic. There's not enough space to move around. You can't even stop and look at something because you feel like you're holding people up, and then they get mad at you because you're holding them up. And I know that that's probably just my brain telling me that, but it definitely, that was one of the bigger things I had an issue with the tribute store. And even the facade, like, I was worried the facade was going to bother me. It really didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I just felt like that was kind of where some of the phoning in happened. Like, that felt really phoned in. Wasn't a whole lot of thought put into it. And it's probably because they had that shipping container available. It was easy. We can put up some of these, fake, cladding, construction cladding and stuff like that, and spray paint on it, and make it look all punky and 90s. And it worked for that, but it just felt like we need to do something, and they didn't want to put the effort into like fitting it in with the theme of the scare zone there, which to me felt like a little underwhelming. But otherwise, I think tribute stores have been better in the past. This year was rough, especially following what they had over the summer, like that movie that movie tribute store they had over by Hollywood.
I think it's still open.
Is it? Yeah. I mean, that scares. I mean, that's, I keep saying, I wanted to say scare zone. No, that tribute store, I think, overshadowed the one for Horror Nights this year.
Oh, 100%. Mm-hmm. I agree. And then, Jamie, did you have another low?
I did. I was going to say the same thing you had said, Nick, before you did. That tribute store, quote unquote, was the worst we've had in years and ruined the vibe of Torture Fair. Unfortunately. Like you said, it was just set up very weird. It was hard to move around. I love stopping and looking at everything, and I felt like I couldn't do that because, like you said, Seamus, I felt bad that I was holding people up or whatever. And I don't know. Overall, I just don't understand why they had that closed off kind of. I mean, I guess they wanted it to look like a bunker, like you're walking into a bunker, but I was like, just the closed off entrance just was so, I don't know, it was just very weird setup. It was a weird theming to have with the Torture Fair stage right across from it. I don't know, it just didn't work for me. But let me see if I had another one. I talked about food for some of the highs previously, but that was more of like the sweet stuff. But I just said that the food items weren't as great as previous years. I feel like last year and the year before, there was like certain things I would like immediately go back to and want to get again. And I feel like this year that wasn't really anything like that. The fish and chips we had a couple times. I think we only had stuff from the Quiet Place once. I think maybe you had more than I did. But
I had it a couple times, yeah.
I feel like I tried food from other places in the park than I did from the actual like Horror Nights food booths. Just was I didn't even have a twisted tater this year because the flavors weren't good either.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. The food that I had, I did enjoy a lot
It
of
wasn't
it.
bad, yeah.
And but maybe besides the rocks from hell, there really
Ugh,
wasn't
those were
a
good.
food item that I was like, I have to get this every night. Like in
Hmm.
past, in years past, we had the
The
grilled
poutine.
cheese, the poutine.
Oh, so good.
There was food items that I would go seeking out,
Hmm.
and this one was more or less like, I'm hungry and I'll get this because I enjoy it. It tastes good, but I'm not like excited to go have this.
Hmm.
So, and then one of my other lows, which I'll probably complain about every single year, is beer choices. They
Yeah.
did up it a little bit. We had the was it Three Daughters Brewing there,
At
but
the triplets, yeah.
but I need them more spaced out at other places. I need to be able to obtain Oktoberfest or pumpkin beers at every single booth. Every food booth should have some sort of pumpkin beer. At least not different ones, but they should all carry the same one. I don't care if it's bottled or canned. You sell a shit ton of cans everywhere else. There's no reason to not have canned pumpkin beer at your Halloween Horror Nights event. That's just me, but that's that. So, any other lows before we get jumping into some actual discussion?
Mm-mm. Think I got all
No, I
mine.
think we nailed it.
Hmm.
All right, well, get ready because this is where we're really going to start dissecting. So, the big discourse amongst everybody is that HHN 33 felt different. No, not many people, some people were saying different as in bad, some people were saying different as they couldn't put their their finger on it. They couldn't figure out what was different about it. So I brought up a couple different points that we can discuss that I think in the end boiled all together created a different, quote unquote, different Halloween Horror Nights event this year. And I think the first one kind of aggravated us a little bit, and that was weather. September was so goddamn relentlessly wet that it did make it hard to thoroughly enjoy it if you weren't prepared for it. And there was no give. There was nights where it said it was, and this is, I know some of these are out of Horror Nights' control. Nobody controls the weather. They don't have a say in that. But that first taste
Well,
in our mouth is like, that's what it is. And we kind of expect it on opening weekend. It's
I
kind of
mean,
a tradition.
to be fair, there are people that do think that the weather is controlled by people, but
but not by,
regardless, you're
but
right. I mean, it's
not by
definitely, this is
universal
not
at least.
something that we're obviously not complaining about it because it is what it is. Weather is weather, but yeah, I mean, at least for the first couple of, I would say the first 3 weeks, it felt like it rained every single night we went there. And not only just like, this is kind of annoying. It won't stop like spitting. Like it downpoured a bunch of nights. And that was annoying for sure. Because, you can only walk around that place soaking wet
It
for
sucked.
so many times that before you finally like, oh, all right, why do I do this again?
Yeah, no,
Um, but yeah, I mean that definitely made it a little bit harder this year. But again, that's not really something that they can control, anyways.
no, not at all. But I do think that maybe for some that was kind of hard to push past. I know there was a couple nights where we were there and it was like we showed up late at like 10, maybe 9 or whatever, and it says like, 20% chance of, light rain. And then at fucking midnight, it's just, or 11:30, it's just downpouring and it's not stopping. And it's like, all right, like, let's just go home. Like, everything is wet. It's soggy. I didn't bring it prevented me from bringing my camera for the first like month or so because I just didn't want to risk it. But I I don't know if it necessarily affected my opinion on it, but it very well subconsciously could have. And I figured that was at least worth bringing up for discussion. If you guys think that maybe that could have affected some people.
Maybe for other people who were only coming into town for a couple nights of it, or maybe just earlier on the season when they had the Rush of Fear for September, because I feel like that was basically the whole month of September. But personally, for someone who normally brings an umbrella and rain jacket, I didn't mind the rain. I thought it was some of the best nights that we had because the house waits were so short and you never get to see it like that. Especially being early in September. We already know it's a little bit slower, but it was just really cool seeing the park that empty, even though the rain, of course, was kind of crappy. And even with the umbrella, you still get kind of wet, the wind, all that kind of stuff. But overall, I didn't think it affected me. But I think for those who didn't have as much time to go to the event as we did, it definitely might have put a little damper on it, which is completely understandable.
No pun intended. Damper.
You see
Um,
what I did?
I see. I see. Yeah, I mean, I'm the one that always says is going to bring an umbrella and a windbreaker, and then I either forget
I
or I
know.
trust my weather app, and I'm like, oh,
I
10%
don't.
chance, like we're good. And then I get there and it's a fucking monsoon. But yeah, I figured, weather was at least a good starting
Yeah.
point for discussion. So let's go all the way back then to the announcements because the marketing of this event was very different, right? We had the Slaughter Cinema at Spooky Empire announcement, and then we had the daily announcements of the houses. It was very different, and that's a good term because it's the one that has carried through to the end of the season, still defining this event as different. So I don't. Maybe this affected it a little bit as well because there was that lull. We had all those kind of originals dropped on us, and then it seemed like we did go a little bit of time without other announcements. And this can kind of bleed into the other aspect of the marketing is that this is another year where now for 34, when I see these ads, I know that they mean absolutely nothing. I'm done analyzing these ads. I'm done analyzing the little videos that they put out for the IPs. They mean diddly squat when it comes to what is at the event, what the theme of the event is, and everything. I mean, the whole thing started with this like fear of underneath Universal, and there's this door behind it, and then this like gust of wind came out, and then you see the big arches as Otis. None of that was in Horror Nights at all. It was a lie.
It made
There
no
was no
sense.
Otis is absolutely nothing of a character,
The only time you would see
non-existent.
him is on the moving walkways, the little banner at the top. That's the only time that they had
Yeah.
him like advertised was the Halloween Horror Nights little thing there.
So I felt lied to. Not that I thought Otis was, not that I was like on the Otis train and like, oh, it's just the coolest thing. But like, again, there's there's a clear disconnect between marketing and operations that I don't know if it's something that necessarily needs to get fixed because does it matter too much? I guess not. Apparently not because it still has great attendance and people still receive those videos pretty well. But I want cohesiveness. You should know when you're putting these out what what the event is, and you should be able to
Agreed.
give us breadcrumbs versus the fear is underneath Universal or whatever the fuck. Like it had zero connection to Horror Nights this year. So any thoughts on that? Like, is that a reason to at least start this event as like I guess it was different, like or is that just common practice at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the announcements this year didn't really get me as hyped up, I guess. I feel like they normally start out with some of the bigger IPs, like you said, and they didn't. They had which I gotta admit, it was cool being at Spooky and getting to see the Slaughter Cinema announcement, but it wasn't the same, you know?
Yeah, I
I
just
missed what
really
you were talking about. I mean, if
or
you're talking about the advertisements or whatever,
yeah.
for me, it's neither here nor there. I don't really care. Like, so they made no sense. Whatever. I do feel like if you're gonna do kind of like that guerrilla marketing and drop these ads and make everybody think, "Ooh, what does this mean?" and then have it mean absolutely nothing, like that's kind of boring. But at the same time, like, does it affect my ability to enjoy the event? No, not really, not at all. Um, but I get where you're coming from. I can see why people would be kind of like bummed out
Mm.
by it. But for me, I'm not. Doesn't really bother me.
Yeah. And then next up, the icons. I think they needed a house. I don't really. They felt, as Seamus, I think, said earlier about something. It felt rushed. It felt like they added these sort of last minute, and then we're like, wait, how can we tie All right, we'll give Surreal this Demon Queen zone. We'll give Sinister the Torture Fair. I guess it doesn't really make sense completely, but we'll run with it. That's how it kind of came across to me. I think that these two icons that it could have been really really cool, especially the duality fear. Like, oh, that's their zone. We're entering the realm. Blah blah blah. And there was nothing there for them. They seem to me very underdeveloped icons. And I just wish that there was more there because their costuming was really cool. The fact that they gave them live mics was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love the theming of them. It's a really cool thing. Like, your mind is the mind of evil or whatever is broken into two parts. Your sinister mind, your surreal mind. I get that part. I love that. But I think that they could have benefited from having a house, if not a house, implementing surreal was implemented into the demon queens pretty well. If you could implement sinister into torture fair as well as surreal was in there, it would have made
Mm-hmm.
more sense versus just like sinister walking around and being like, welcome to my torture fair. It's like, well, it's not really, that wasn't the point of this, I guess. It was really a renaissance fair gone bad, but I guess it's your fair now. I don't know. What are your thoughts on like the icons and like being there but not fully fleshed out?
I mean, they're one of those whole like, are they icons or are they like icons? Like, I think that was what it comes down to. I never thought of them as icons. I thought of them as cool characters they threw in there just to kind of give some life to the scare zones and try to tie them in a little bit. But I never really treated them as like, they're on the same level as a Jack event or Lady Luck event or something like that. But I thought they were cool. I thought the way they looked was really unique and different. Kind of gave off some of like a Cenobite vibe. I think I may have brought that up at some point when we were there. Um, but otherwise, I think they weren't what made me feel like the event felt rushed, I guess is my point. Like there were other reasons why I felt like some of this felt hammed up or phoned in or shoved in places where it shouldn't have been. They were kind of like, well, it makes sense to have some characters here that tie everything in. So it didn't bother me. And I do like the fact that they were given hot mics and they were able to like interact with the crowd a little bit more rather than just kind of like walking around and like looking at you and stuff. They kind of did what I thought they should have done with Oddfellow last year. Like Oddfellow should have been like that, given the guy a hot mic, let him kind of like play off the crowd a little bit, do some um, improv. But obviously they didn't really think to do that. But maybe something we'll see in the future, hopefully going forward.
Yeah, and I think
giving characters more of because I think you saw some of that like with Jack. They would give the Jack actor a megaphone and let him walk around and scream at people, but it was never like let's make an actual performance element out of it. So that's kind of nice to see that kind of be mixed in.
Yeah, it was just like a little bit extra, whenever you caught Jack. But I think they did a little bit with Oddfellow, but not to the extent of Sinister and Surreal. They put them on stages, they put them up on the truss, like they did a lot with them. But I just felt like maybe coming off the Oddfellow year where we had Oddfellow up front, but he also had a house, I got a little spoiled in that sense where I was like, okay, I can understand and appreciate the character that much more now. But Jamie,
Yeah.
thoughts on Sinister, Surreal, and like underutilization maybe or underdevelopment?
I feel like it just kind of all goes back to the theming. I feel like the theming didn't really make sense with the marketing and the IPs that were chosen. And Boots is crying in the background. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
but I just feel like it just all didn't really make sense to me. I feel like if they wanted to have Sinister and Surreal be those icons, I feel like they should have marketed with them. I feel like they could have made some really cool commercials and like stuff like that with them versus having just like the IP commercials and then a commercial that had nothing to do with anything of the theming of the event with
Yeah,
like you were
yeah.
saying the underground fear and stuff like that. But in the
You
past
could have
they've
had
done such
Sinister,
cool
Surreal right up
commercials.
front
Yeah, they
in
could
the
have they've done
commercials.
and I was gonna say it could have been fun like kind of back in the day when the director excuse me had some of the commercials of him torturing like the jester and just really cool easy stuff that I feel like could have been done and would have added to that more cohesiveness of the event, which I feel like that's what it is for me. The cohesiveness of the event wasn't there. And like you said, it was cool that they had him out there in the scare zone, but even if they made it kind of like the archway into like a portal, like you were walking through the portal like into their universe kind of thing, just something like that to add to it, because it did just feel so empty right there. And their makeup and design and character design and everything is just so like insane, and seeing it up close too, that I feel like it really just kind of got didn't get enough praise as it should have, or enough kind of use of its, however you want to
How
say it.
good? Yeah, they didn't get to showcase
Yeah,
it as much as
yeah,
they probably should
showcase it.
have.
There you go. That's the word I'm looking for. But yeah,
Yeah. The next one I had is something that I think you could probably do every year with everything. You know, be like, oh, it was pretty close, but for me, it felt like, and this goes into another thing that I didn't talk about was, you know, the last couple years we've consistently had a house where we've been like, oh, this is a top tier house. You know, we've had the Darkest Deals and the Blood Moons, we've had the Wicked Growths, we've had the Dead Mans, we've had the Graveyard Games. This year we didn't have that like top tier house, and I think a lot of them were very close to that. I think we had a couple things here and there that were very close. So triplets, I think the things that were missing, and this is a longer list. So these are just for me off my head, things that are missing from these things that could have taken them all to maybe not that extent of a level, but brought them up a little bit. But triplets, I think the story and the decades could have been explained better, whether that's visually or through the podcast format. The goblins, I think that they could have had an even higher scale in those tent houses. A Quiet Place, more actors. You need more physical actors, less puppets for me. Ghostbusters, I think it needed to be more freezing. I think you needed to pump that AC. And I know it's hard to maintain that cold temperature, but I think you need to tell that story. Monstros, we've talked about this 1,000 times, but the finale really just needs you need a better cherry on top. The monsters just needs to, that story again needs to be fleshed out, and you need moments of breathtaking time to let the story kind of develop a little bit. Duality fear, split pathways, and any decorations would have been good in there besides two little colored tarps or whatever. Swamp, you should have extended that out towards the front a little bit more. Torture fair, more fair aesthetic and less like static pieces. You know, those are really cool, but again, it's just, you know, the Blood Angels just kind of in the middle of the street, not doing anything. The other, you know, there's just, I need more fair interaction. I needed somebody being like, hear ye to the proclamation of, you know, something like that, other than just the king and queen. Blumhouse needed props from those movies, and then the tribute store I put what the fuck was this. But yeah, so I feel like a lot of, and I know that was a lot, but I felt like a lot of items, whether houses or scare zones, were missing just one or two things to really set it to that next level. But what do you think? Do you think that these houses, obviously we can nitpick now and be like, this should be here, this should be here, and every year if we went back we could probably say the same thing, but it did feel like there was not a house this year that was that top tier perfect house. What do you think about like missing pieces and components of really reaching full potential for these things?
I agree. I feel like that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. I feel like all the houses were generally good this year. I feel like none of them really stood out to me besides Insidious, because it was such a beautiful, amazing, great house. And Goblins, to be honest. I feel like Goblins had a lot of detail. I just wish Goblins was a little bit longer. I feel like that was the only thing for me. But I kind of like how you started it out too. I feel like you can kind of do that with any house, really kind of pick specific little things. But I do wish there was more of those houses where I was like, man, like I can't wait to do this house again. Like I have to do this house tonight kind of thing. I feel like none of them were really top tier like that for me, other than Insidious, which was unfortunate because it would have some of the longest waits of the nights. We didn't get to do it every single time we went, but
No, long pause. Sorry.
no,
um,
it's okay. I thought Seamus. Sorry, Seamus.
No, that's fine. Dead air. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to add, anyways, to it. I think you guys kind of hit the nail in the coffin. So
Yeah. Um,
Or hit the nail on the head. Is that the right? I don't know. I can't think of the phrase.
Nail in the coffin's
Either
true.
works in this term. All right. So then a couple little things too now. There was really no quote unquote major IP. So these next three things, I went back from 32 to 29 to kind of give examples, right? So really no major IP this year. I'd say, I mean, I guess A Quiet Place and say like, but they're not super prevalent right now. Last year we had Stranger Things 4 and The Last of Us. Those are like just blockbusters. 31, you had The Weekend and Halloween. Like those are again pretty top tier things. 30, you had Beetlejuice and you had Hill House, which I think at the time was a pretty prevalent grab from Netflix. And then 29, you had Stranger Things, you had Ghostbusters, you had House of a Thousand Corpses. You had big draws. Whereas I don't think this year you had that major IP. Do you view Insidious and A Quiet Place in in the same talks in the same categories as those last ones that we've had the last 4 years, 5 years, whatever it
Insidious,
is?
yes. A Quiet Place, probably not. Just because I still would have never guessed they would ever decide to do a Quiet Place based house. I
Yeah,
feel
I'm
like
not sure.
I feel like Insidious has a pretty big following still, even with all the different films that have came out and stuff like that. I feel like for when the first one came out, it was really scary for like even people who don't really watch horror like that. I feel like it was a movie that a lot of people have still seen.
Yeah, I mean, it is big. It is a big franchise, but like, is it on the level of like Last of Us and Stranger Things and The Weekend and Beetlejuice?
It's hard to say because I feel like all the other ones are series compared to a film, but then with The Weekend and I feel like the musical
I mean,
aspect is
they're
hard to
different
compare on.
genres,
But
yes.
it's yeah, but Beetlejuice no, because I feel like that's such an iconic film and it is hard to compare, I guess.
Yeah, but so I guess to wrap up,
Of course if it was something like if we had all this lineup this year and then if we had Texas Chainsaw like Hollywood did, like that would be the big IP draw for sure.
I think so.
I would
Seamus,
think.
do you view like these as in that group, like major IPs, or do you think there is a little bit of a difference?
No, I think Insidious, yes, but
Okay.
everything else, no.
Yeah.
Just because I think what they were trying to do with the Quiet Place wasn't quite what they were going for, and it just wasn't. It didn't feel like your typical normal big draw IP. Insidious, yeah, because it's kind of become another one of those horror um, series or franchises that you kind of expect a new one every every so often. And it's kind of like if you think about it, the poster child for 2000s horror movies or 2010 horror movies. Um, like when you think of that era, you think of Insidious or a few of those other James Wan style um, scare movies. Is it maybe not on the same level as some of the other bigger ones? Yeah, because I think when you think haunted house, you expect like give me the Freddy house, give me the Jason house, give me that iconic '80s character that everybody knows and remembers. And we didn't have that, so maybe I think that's kind of where it felt a little underwhelming. I think also knowing that chances are we were supposed to get a Nightmare House and we didn't get it, I think doesn't help because it feels like, hey, we were supposed to have that big iconic IP and we didn't get it, and I think that was probably what was supposed to happen, but just obviously for whatever reason it didn't. So yeah, I think maybe not on the same level, but I still think that Insidious is
Up there.
or was that that big draw.
Well, Seamus, you segued us perfectly into the next thing because there was really, I mean, I guess you could throw Ghostbusters in there, but I put no classic horror because Ghostbusters this year was based off Frozen Empire, which I wouldn't view and put it in the classic horror like you were talking about, that 80s style. And I know where it sounds like old man talk, like, but the classics. But 32, you had Exorcist and you had Chucky. Whether it worked or didn't, Chucky was there. 31, you had Michael Myers. 30, you had Leatherface and Beetlejuice. And 29, you had original Ghostbusters and you had Killer Clowns from Outer Space on top of House of Thousand Corpses. So, like, you kind of had that classic horror. Do you think that that was a point that we really missed this year by not having like one of those
It felt like
classics?
something was missing
Right,
from the
and
IPs.
and that's
Yes.
the that's like this long discussion is like trying to figure out like why it was different, what was missing, and that kind of was so like maybe for people that this is what they live and breathe is that classic horror and it was gone, this might have been the reasoning, but I don't view anything that we had as classic horror, even though there's Ghostbusters. I don't view Frozen Empire
Yeah,
in that
and I don't even view Ghostbusters as
Ghostbusters.
horror. I know that it is technically a horror movie,
Like
but to me,
spooky.
it's first a comedy with horror elements, with
Mhm.
scary elements to it. But it's not a horror movie as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. So is it a classic? Yes. Are there classic elements to it? Because obviously you had classic characters in it. You had the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, so there were aspects to it. We actually had the Cadillac, we had the Echo One. So there were aspects to the house where it was like, hey, this is classic Ghostbusters. But you're right, it was basically Frozen Empire, so it's not really the original movie. And it did feel like there should have been at least one. We keep saying the word, but there should have been one classic, memorable, nostalgic um, horror movie or horror IP, or even an original with more of that feeling. Because to me, triplets didn't give you that. I think that's maybe what they were going for.
Hmm.
Triplets is supposed to be that like callback to like 70s and 80s grindhouse, and it really wasn't as far as I'm concerned. Um, so I can kind of see where that feeling comes from. But yeah, I think there was definitely something along those lines missing. But at the same time, Ghostbusters I think was good enough that it kind of took some of that heat, I guess. Like it's a stupid pun, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like it took some of that, at least gave us
It
something.
alleviated it a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
alleviated it a little bit. Put some icy hot on it.
All
Get it?
right. Ooh, yeah. Frozen hot. Jamie, what do you think
Stupid
about
jokes. I'm sorry.
that? Like the missing of the classic horror. Like, did you feel that this year?
Of course I did.
Okay,
I
I'm
feel
just.
like no. I'm not saying that in like in a mean way, but I just feel like me, I like the big IPs, and I feel like there's that one thing that you're always really looking forward to, and as excited as I was for Insidious, it's just there was still like you said, or like I had mentioned earlier, if we had Texas Chainsaw, we'd have that Leatherface presence this year, like Hollywood did. And I feel like even though you can include the Universal Monsters House, the Bloodlines as being another one of those IPs, I feel like it just really didn't fall into that category this year. And it seems we only had 3 IPs and 7 original houses.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
Seamus segued us perfectly last time, and Jamie, you just segued us perfectly this time. I put the Universal Monsters really wasn't like the big names this
Mhm.
year. It was called Bloodlines, and that's fine, but it was led by Saskia Van Helsing, which was kind of a new take. They didn't really, Van Helsing, if you pushed that name, Van Helsing, or,
Mhm.
pushed the Helsing thing a little bit more, but the whole creating this new character sort of I felt like the guy got lost in the shuffle. You brought Bride of Frankenstein back, but there was no real tie-in other than her just appearing. Unless you listened to the podcast, you wouldn't really know the Bride of Frankenstein was really that big of a deal in the storyline. But then looking back, like last year was, and I'm going to say this in the nicest way, but those were the weakest or lesser known of the Universal monsters. You had the Invisible Man, Hunchback, Phantom, Doctor Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Those are the not bottom tier, but they're below the others in popularity, but they're still very well known. But then in 31, I mean, you had the three heavy hitters. You had Mummy, Wolfman, Dracula. 30, you had the bride, and it was in the name. Bride of Frankenstein lives. Like,
Mhm.
all right, we know we're going to Frankenstein. We got the Bride of Frankenstein. And then 29 was the compilation y, all of them. So, like, the monsters, that monsters house just sort of being with the story that it was, that could also be like a missing piece. What do you think? Did you feel that way, Jamie? Too? Like it just didn't. It didn't feel like a. It didn't feel like a monsters house that we were used to.
It didn't, because I feel like with the Monsters House, we would always find ourselves going back to it, especially last year. I loved the Monsters Unleashed, or I almost said Monsters Unleashed. But I really enjoyed that iteration of the Monsters House last year, so I was pretty hopeful for this one this year. But like you said, I just feel like the route that they took with picking these different monsters we're not as familiar with and a different story that we're not as familiar with, it was hard to follow and hard to relate in that sense. And I feel like it did take one of those IP spots that we could have had one or two more actual IP houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that um, their first mistake was making Van Helsing the lead.
Mhm.
I think putting Van Helsing in a monsters house would make sense, but it's a Universal Monsters house first.
Mhm.
So the story should have been Van Helsing as a supporting character and having the monsters be the lead, and not the story revolve around Van Helsing and have the monsters be those secondary characters. It just I think it felt weak in that
Yeah.
sense. The story was very hard to follow, anyways, but it would have been better had it been focused around Dracula's daughter, and then have Van Helsing playing a supporting role to her, not the other way around.
Yeah. I think that would have been a smart move too. Like you know, the Hunt of Dracula, or
Right,
like
because you should have
something
just
like
called it
that.
like Universal Monsters Saskia's Revenge or something like that, not Bloodlines.
Yeah, because you don't. It doesn't tell you much, And I guess when they tell us a story, they're like, "Well, it's bloodlines. It's the bloodline of Dracula's bloodline." It's like, okay, that's fine, but like, it doesn't tell us that. I don't know that without you telling me that.
Mhm.
So
Right.
that's another thing. So with all of those things that we just discussed, um, I think the biggest one that people thought, and this is still nothing that has been confirmed, it will never be confirmed, we'll never know. But the whole, Epic is being built right down the street. Where was the staff that is in the creative? Were they stretched too thin? Was the budget stretched too thin? Were the resources of buildings stretched too thin? We won't necessarily know any of this, but do you see that as it has to be part of it, right? It has to play a factor of some sorts. What do you think that's also a factor in what might have
One
felt
hundred
a little bit?
percent. I think, and I don't think they were. I don't think they were hiding it either. Like, I don't think it was like some big secret. I think it was pretty well accepted that this year was gonna be weaker just because we don't have as much of a budget to work with, because we are trying to open up a brand new theme park. Obviously, when that theme park opens, we'll be able to kind of focus more of our efforts on it next year. But um, I think this is something we potentially have to be used to for the next couple of seasons, because Epic is supposed to open next year, but
Yeah.
who knows how long
Right.
before they finally work out all the kinks and can kind of focus more on their traditional events going forward. But yeah, I definitely think it had something to do with it. I think that's partially why we didn't get Nightmare. I think I have a feeling that Nightmare, whoever has the rights to it, wanted more than Universal was willing to pay, um, and that kind of caused some of the issue. But I do think focusing a lot of their efforts and time and resources on getting that theme park ready to go, especially considering the fact that I don't know if it was delayed or not, but it definitely, after the pandemic and stuff, like they needed to like buckle down and try to get that park ready to go
Yeah.
for next summer. So yeah, I think that had something to do with it for sure.
It like makes me feel bad because I want to say that it did, but then it's like, what if it didn't? And they thought that they did really, really well in this event and worked really hard on it. And they're like, man, people are going to love this shit. And then what if they were disappointed and upset that no one really liked it? So it makes me feel bad in that aspect, because I know that they worked to their best ability with what they were given, or what IPs they were able to use, or what ideas that they had and stuff like that. Because by no means do I think they lacked on the house design. I think the designs of all the houses were great. And I think the scare actors
No, and
all
I
did
think
great in their roles, but I do think that some of the extra expenses that could have been used towards some other things for this event were probably used to go for Epic, which is understandable.
Yeah, I don't think it's not. I mean, at least from me, I'm not saying that in the sense that like I felt like they cheaped out. Like it doesn't feel like they went cheap or anything like that. It just feels like you can tell that they reused a lot of props. Like I stated before, we've talked throughout the year, throughout the season, that to me, triplets felt like it was just Stranger Things with with different characters in it, because
Like,
it
what do we have in
definitely felt like
storage?
they had to reuse a lot of different things. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that it's a business; they've got to make, they've got to prepare, especially when they've got plans to open up a brand new experience with Epic. So like I get it. So like I'm not begrudging them at all for that. And they do, Jamie, you're right. I mean, even for what they did have to cut back on, it still felt like they did a really good job with coming up with original ideas and building these houses to the same level of effort that they usually do. I just feel like you can tell a little bit that there wasn't a lot of budget to do big, gigantic, grandiose things either. There really wasn't a whole lot of that. I mean, I think for me, like the biggest, we'll say, set pieces was like in Monsters when you walked into the vampire, into Dracula's castle, like that big set piece. That was like one iconic, um, obviously put a lot of effort and time and money into building that set, but there really weren't a lot of those. And, obviously you think Houses of the Years Past with like Descendants of Destruction, which was, for a house that no one really expected anything from. It's like, what is this? Like, this is some 2-bit original. And they had some of the craziest set design you've ever seen in a tent. So you
Yeah.
can tell that they went balls to the walls. We're going to throw as much money at this as we can to make this amazing. You didn't have that this year. There wasn't a single house this year where you felt like they threw as much of what they could resource wise and effort wise into building. And again, that's no shade at them. I'm not saying that like they were bad, but at the same time, nothing gave me the feeling of no holds barred, nothing's being held back. We're not going to withhold any resources from this particular house. They really didn't feel like that.
Yeah, it felt like they worked smarter and not harder this year.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that
Nope.
whatsoever.
No, it did feel that way through a couple times. As much as I enjoyed Goblins, and we'll get to how much I enjoyed Goblins, it does feel like maybe their ideas were stretched thin, where they're like, "Hey, we've talked about this idea forever. What is it? Well, it's a Goblin house. Okay, yeah, just go with it. We don't really need to develop storyline. We don't have to. It's just you're in a Goblin Thanksgiving. Go with it. Run. That's
Right.
where it felt shorted for me, where it was like maybe some of these ideas, like they just needed to get something out quick because they had to, in 10 minutes they had a meeting for Epic or something like that. Like it felt time wise maybe stretched a little bit thin for some people. But yeah, that's where I kind of view it was that thin. And our last little topic before we get into this rankings list. I did see Mike Aiello put out on Twitter that for HHN 34, he will be back overseeing the full event. Now, I'm not sure what his exact duties have been previously, but I believe the last time he was in this capacity of overseeing the event with Laura Souls is 29, because he has been developing on Epic a lot. I believe this is all I'm speculating here, but I think he had his hands in with obviously the Dark Universe. He still had his hands in Horror Nights as in the past years, but I don't think he was as stationed there. And now that the development of Monsters is done with, and it's just being built and produced and opened, now he's refocusing back onto the HHN side. So that's exciting. 29, if you ask around, is some of people's favorite year. So does that little news excite you? And do you think that might be a knee jerk reaction to people's surveys or reception of this past event, or was it just because Epic's opening? He's
I
going
don't think
back
it's a
to
reaction
home.
to anything. I think it's just he's, going back to what he likes doing. Like, I mean, I think this is definitely passion project for him. So it's not like, I don't think it's any type of reaction. I think he just needs to be pulled away for other things, making sure that Epic is the best that it can be. I have a feeling he had his hands in the Monsters zone pretty handily. So that I'm actually kind of excited to check out. But it is exciting that he's back. I do feel like without someone like him kind of like overseeing everything, it doesn't feel as cohesive. And if what you say is true that he's been gone since 29, it makes kind of sense. It makes some sense why the events haven't felt as dialed in as they could be. Whereas maybe an event that he has worked on, it feels like everything kind of interconnects a lot better. But I mean, that's not taking away from anything that his team does. Like
No,
it's not like it's
I mean,
right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they have done is bad. It's just, I think you need that overarching direction to make sure everything kind of falls in line with each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was our discussion on like why we think it could have felt a little bit different. If you had any other reasons, let us know, because I tried to really dissect this event as to, it's been a discussion. You can't avoid it. People have said it feels different, and I don't think people are wrong in saying that. I love the event and I loved going to this event, but
I even
compared to the last couple of years, I don't know where I'd have to. That's a future episode. We'll stack up the last 5 years or whatever. But for me, I don't think it's coming close to a couple of the other ones. So yeah. Any closing thoughts on HHN as a whole this year? Why it felt different? Did it feel different to you? I guess we haven't really discussed if it did feel different to you. And we talked about potential reasons why, but I mean, Seamus, did it feel different to you this year compared to the whole the others?
Did it feel different? Kind of. I don't know if I would say that it felt drastically different than what the last 2 or 3 seasons have been. But I do think it did. There was something lacking this season, and I've been saying it for a while. It's hard for me to put my finger on what that is. Like I don't really can't pinpoint exactly what felt off about it, but it definitely didn't feel like a full blown Horror Nights that we've come to like and come to know. But at the same time, I don't know if that's just because the houses were weak. Well, the theming was weak, I guess is the better way to put it.
Stories or whatever.
There wasn't really anything incredible. There really wasn't a house this year that, other than the one I put at 1, that really kind of like blew me away. Whereas I feel like in years past, there have been a number of houses and a number of other things, and the scare zones felt a lot more alive and more put together. So yeah, I think there was something about it this year that felt different. But again, did it take away from my overall experience? No, I don't think so. And maybe that just could be, because I love it so much that it's hard for me to like find fault in it. But I do see that, where some people are coming from when they say that, hey, it definitely didn't feel like a traditional Horror Nights.
Mm-hmm. Jamie?
I feel like it felt different kind of for my own personal reasons. I feel like we usually go with a lot of friends, and a lot of friends usually go, and I feel like all of our close friends normally go with us, and we get that big group together. Did not go this year except for one time, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So I feel like in that sense, it didn't feel the same for
dick.
me.
You're in the other room, asshole.
And I was gonna say, and our roommate Alex too. You
playing
too, buddy.
Mario Party right now. They probably won't even listen. So fuck them. They should have come.
But I also feel like the houses felt like Horror Nights this year, but the scare zones did not. I feel like there was just no atmospheric presence, if that's the right usage for the wording. I feel like when I was walking around the park, I felt like I was walking around the park just at nighttime, not during Horror Nights. But when I would get in line for the houses and go through the houses, it would be Horror Nights, and then I would come back out. And I just feel like that overall immersiveness and theming just wasn't there. And I feel like the shrinking of the scare zones and not having anything in the Simpsons area, not having anything really, kind of when you're past the Harry Potter entrance going over that bridge, you have those 2 little food stands now, which is good. But even then they had like the little like Chucky photo op booth thing set up there.
Yeah.
Just I just feel like there's not enough stuff that makes it feel like it's Horror Nights. Like when you're standing over in the back by where ET is and everything, since they don't have the house entrances over there anymore, in this kid zone, I feel like it's just completely empty and just really takes away from the fact that you're at Horror Nights. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. I just feel like the scare zones
It
just didn't
does. It
mesh
felt
well
like there was
together for
more
me. A
dead
lot of
areas.
empty, yes, a lot of empty space.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel the same. I'm not saying that it was a bad event because
No,
of course
no.
it wasn't, but it did feel off. It didn't
Yeah.
feel like there was cohesiveness. I think the icons being thrown in there,
Mhm.
but like not really, that hurt it for me. I think the overall scare zone themselves were just kind of I didn't find myself being pulled towards any necessarily being like, hey, there's a long time, all the wait times are long, let's go hang out in this zone. It didn't feel
Mhm.
that way. I didn't
No.
really get pulled to them. Same thing with the show. I didn't really get pulled to the show this year too much. I was never
I
like
saw
in
it
that mood.
once.
And yeah, I saw it twice, I
Yeah.
think. But I just it did feel like overall there was something missing, and I think everything we discussed, I think there was a little bit of everything, and if there's a little bit of one or two, you don't notice it, but when it's a little bit of a lot of those things, it does add up, and for me, it did add up, and it didn't feel like the Horror Nights that I have come to know and love. It didn't on par with anything else that I've gone to. Um, but with that being said, you ready for rankings? Let's get into our
Good
final
rankings.
rankings. I guess when we go through these, once we finish our lists, I will have you run through them again, but I'm also
Oh,
going to try to find.
are we gonna do 10, 9, or just do 1 through 10?
We'll go one by one, but I'm going to pull up at the end. I'm going to pull up where we had these pre-ranked as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
So we'll
Yeah, I
start
mean,
with
I don't
scare.
think we need to spend like 15 minutes on every
No.
position, too. I
No,
mean, you can just
It's
kind of give a quick if.
as much as you'd love to, Nick. I know you would.
you don't want to do a 3-hour episode?
Well, listen, it's not so much that
No.
I feel like we've kind of set our piece in a lot of these houses, so
Yeah.
it's kind of more just
I don't want to be
where have we finally
mundane.
kind of where did they kind of like end up? And I'm sure there's going to be discussion because I know that my list might, I don't know, surprise you, but like it's definitely going to like cause for some discussion.
I
So
think mine will. But yeah, we can discuss a little bit. But yeah, we don't have to go in depth on these. That can be another episode, maybe down the road once we like feel like they've marinated a little bit more. But yeah, we'll start with scare zones. I think I'm just gonna assume we all have the same. But my number 5 is Duality of Fear. Not
Yeah.
really.
same,
Yeah, that's kind
not
of.
a whole lot to say about it.
All right, well,
No,
we'll circle
sadly.
right back to me then. So my 4th scare zone. This is where we might switch stuff up a little bit. I had Swamp of the Undead at 4.
Wow,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, yep.
You were the
I
one that
know,
was highest on it the
I
whole
know,
year.
I
Like you were
was.
just
I just,
that's wild to
I
me.
know it, and that's why I like doing these after the fact because I really didn't. I just walked through there. I didn't spend time in the
Exactly.
zone
That's what I was
for the
saying.
zone. I just walked through it. I like all the set pieces. I thought it was fun, but again, it was just kind of was what it was. It was just a little zombie thing. They didn't play on the whole like Bayou style as much as I want. Like they just threw a shack up and a couple props, and the props were cool. But you could have been anywhere with those zombies. The swamp part was pretty cool with like the water and stuff. But I ended up finding myself in other zones more, so that's why I put them higher. So Jamie, what
That's
did you
fair.
have at 4?
Swamp of the Undead.
Okay, I'm not
I
alone.
did.
All right,
Wow.
No, I
I'm
know
not.
it's
This
just
actually is going to be a lot more interesting than I think we expected.
it's the
Yeah.
So
same
just
thing you
wait.
said. It's the same thing you said, Nick. I just feel like this is my favorite scare zone area, and I just did not find myself really even going on that side of the park very much to walk through it. When I feel like in
Yeah,
previous years when they had the Scarecrow one and when they had the oh my god, I'm drawing a blank here for the other scare zones, but I
Jungle of
really enjoy
Doom.
Jungle of Doom. I just really, and even when that one was excuse me, even that one wasn't really my favorite, but still I just feel like I spent more time in some of the other ones than I did with this one too.
All right. So Seamus, you're number 4.
Number 4 is Blumhouse.
Okay. All right.
That's understandable though.
Better or worse than you
Never
expect than you anticipated?
it never got better um, throughout the year. Unfortunately, I get what they had to do. Like they had to do something there, and it's easy when you've got an ongoing relationship with the production company and you've got all the characters you can use and the costumes and stuff. Um, but this is where it really felt phoned in. I keep saying that phrase, but this is where it really felt like, hey, we're just gonna throw something here and be done with it. And it sucks because I remember like our pre-event lists, our hype lists, and talking with the big round table, I had it pretty high because I really thought that, well, maybe it'll be more of like a party vibe. It'll be more upbeat, kind of like a pseudo Rob Zombie scare zone. I was really hoping for that, and it just didn't do it. There wasn't enough going on. Um, I've said it before. I think that it was a massive mistake putting both the grabber and Megan on the same end of the scare zone because it created a ridiculously unnecessary bottleneck. And I felt like those were the only two people, only two characters anybody gave a shit about, and it was a problem. There wasn't enough going on. There was definitely a missed opportunity. You could have had the Megan horde in there. You could have had a whole bunch of other different things happen. Like every so often, have the purge sound go off and like this is the beginning of the annual purge. And the purge people come out and do a big thing. They did nothing like that, and I think it fell super flat. So it sucks. I wish they did more with it because I really do love the Blumhouse movies. I think there's something fun about all of them in certain ways, and they just didn't do enough with it. So, actually, kind of surprised you guys have Blumhouse ranked higher than Swamp of the Undead, because for as
Yeah.
boring as Swamp of the Undead is, at least there was some sort of cohesion going on in there. There was something to it.
Yeah. So what really set it, and let's just jump into it. My number 3 is Enter the Blumhouse. What set it, what gave it just that slight edge was the scare actors in Blumhouse for me. I got more interactions with them than I did in the Swamp. In the Swamp, I was like, you'd go by the possum lady, and she'd be like, "Possum," and that was it. I was like, all right, like I did have I did have one very cool interaction on like second. I think it was the Friday of closing night. If you're the zombie, you're awesome. But I was walking through on the phone, and then he came up next to me and was like, he gave me like the phone signal. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm doing it's almost like the hang loose, but I put the phone up to the zombie, and he was just like, "Brah." And then I got back on the discussion, and I was like, oh, sorry, that was my friend. And then the zombie looked at me, and he shook his head no. And I was like, he is not my friend. I'm sorry. And then I walked away. Cool interaction. I loved it. There was one girl in there, long hair. She looked like a contortionist. She would throw her body around. Great. But back to my number 3 as Enter the Blumhouse is just, I did find myself wanting to walk through there a little bit just to kind of, I didn't care as much about the grabber and Megan just because there was like that horde of people. But going through with the Blumhouse or the Black Phone characters on the left, the Purge characters, the freaky girl was always like, "Give me the knife." The freaky girl with the Happy Death Day with the axe was always coming at me. I just got better scare actor interactions in that zone than I did in Swamp of the Undead, unfortunately. But that's why I had that at 3. So, Jamie, you're number 3.
That's why it was my number 3 as well.
Oh
And
man,
then the
our lists are
Blumhouse is also.
identical right now.
I know. I'm interested to see what your friend of your number 2 is, or your number 1. But yeah, I feel like Blumhouse kind of grew over me. I feel like I was really hyped up for it at the beginning of the season. Kind of disappointed me a little bit, but I feel like the character interactions did become more abundant throughout the couple months. And I'm a sucker for a photo op. I just love seeing the grabber. Loved hanging out with him, interacting with him, taking some pics. It was fun. I do wish. Excuse my grammar. I do wish that it had more set pieces and more, in that sense, more of a story versus more of a just kind of mixed match of different characters with different kind of little things. Like you had the black
Mhm.
phone thing, and you had the lockers and stuff for it was either Freaky or Happy Death Day. I still haven't seen either movies, but just wish they had a little more added to it for that aspect. But the scare zones. Oh, it's getting late. I cannot talk. The scare actors did do really well in this zone, and I feel like they're the ones who made it for me.
Yeah. Yep. So Seamus, you're number 3.
Seamus, you're muted.
Oh.
I'm muted. I was like, what? No reaction?
No
huh?
reaction.
Wow,
Nothing.
No
that's
reaction.
interesting. My number 3 is Torture Fair.
Oh, that would have gained a
wow.
reaction.
That's the reaction
Okay,
I
that's
was
why you
waiting
were like,
for.
hey, what the fuck is happening? Wow. Okay, number 3. Okay, care to explain?
Yeah, because it didn't do anything it didn't do what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
We talked about it, I think, throughout the season. We talked about it before the season that, what I wanted, what I expected was give me the feeling of being at a Ren fair, a messed up Ren fair, fucked up, we're torturing people Ren fair. There were so many things they could have done with it. The sound effects could have been so much better, whereas it just felt like it was like, I think at one point, I think there's a song they play in there that it sounded like they were playing like a Weekend song or something.
They have a song
It
that
just
sounds
it
like The
didn't.
Last of Us too. The
Oh,
Last
The
of Us.
Last of Us. That
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
They sound like The Last of Us, and it's, I don't know. That scare zone had the most promise, and it underdelivered so hard.
There's a lot of missing details.
I mean, the scare actors did a really good job. I think they did what they, I think they were really unique. A lot of unique, different setups, different, things to kind of see. The knight in the armor had a really good scare. I think a lot of people didn't expect him to be real, and then he would do his thing, and they'd all freak out. Obviously, the plague doctors and their sex appeal, they were
Plague Daddies.
they were good, but at the end of the day, it felt like I was kind of just, I don't know, I wasn't taken away. I want to be taken away and feel like I'm in, some sort of medieval Renaissance thing feeling. I wanted the sounds, I wanted the smells of like roast pork or whatever. I wanted it to feel like I was there, and I just didn't feel like I was at a, I just didn't feel right. Like last year with Vamp, it felt like you were at a 60s music festival.
Yeah.
This year, it didn't really do a very good job of it. So it sucks because I really wanted to like this scare zone more than I did, but just wasn't in it for me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll swing back to me then for my number 2, and my number 2 is Torture Fair. I a lot of what Seamus said is kind of what I felt too. It just felt like it was missing some of these little details that really could have taken you there, and it didn't. They just, they put the stage up, they put a couple booths up, they put those fucking sawhorses in the middle of the goddamn scare zone for no reason, like, and that was it. But like, I expected, like, the trumpets going, and like more so than just that little stage show thing. But like,
It
I
needed to
expect
be
the scare
darker too.
actors. Yeah, I imagine the scare actors walk around just like, hear ye, I do proclaim that, for the king and queen, like, and it was really just like, it was really just victims walking around, and you had to experience that. You had to go to the stage and watch and wait for the Sinister show. But then when there was a show, it was more or less the Sinister show. The king and queen were kind of up there walking around, but I would have liked for them to have hot mics too, the king and queen. And I get you had to tie Sinister in, but I feel like tying her in took away from the Renaissance fair aesthetic. No, it just kind of didn't vibe for me there. So that's why I put it at number 2, but a respected spot nonetheless. So Jamie, you're number 2.
You're really making this easy for me, Nick. So my number 2, which is a switch up from my original list, is Torture Fair as well.
Identical lists, then it is.
Identical
Okay.
list. Unfortunately, not too fun.
Any reasons other than the ones that me or Seamus stated, or
No, I was just going to say it's kind of what you guys did for me. And I feel like the lighting this year, I know usually it's pretty well lit in that scare zone, especially with the different theming that they've had with the vamp scare zones and major suites and different stuff like that before. But I feel like maybe adding some more things. I know it sounds kind of weird, more things on the side to kind of make it feel more immersed and closed in. I feel like if they had more like, because like you said, they had the stagnant props in the middle with different torture devices and stuff like that. But I just feel like they needed some shrubbery, some fake trees, some something just to make it feel like you're at
I
that
give
like
you a
fair, like not
shrubbery.
right, just not like in the middle of the streets. I don't know. Just when I picture a torture fair, I pictured medieval times, big castles, and like dirt floors and
Mead.
grass and trees and mead and stuff like that. And yeah, I just wish it had a little more foliage, I guess, to it, which is kind of nitpicky to say, but
Right. Can I get some forks and knives? There were no forks and knives in medieval times since there are no forks and knives at medieval times. But you have Pepsi? Dude, I have a lot of tables. If anybody gets that reference, you're welcome. Um,
I don't
Seamus, you're number 2. You don't get the reference?
know.
Cable guy. The cable guy, Jim Carrey.
Larry the Cable Guy?
Matt. No, not Larry the Cable
No,
Guy.
it's a
The movie,
movie.
The Cable Guy. Jim
I was
It
just
Carrey,
gonna
Matthew
was
say,
Broderick. They go to medieval times and they hassle
not ringing a bell.
the
Not ringing a
server
bell.
because he asked for forks and knives, and because it was medieval times, they don't have forks and knives, but apparently they have
Ah,
Pepsi. Like,
clever.
dude, I got a lot of tables. Seamus, you're number 2.
my number 2 is Swamp of the Undead.
So
Okay.
wow.
Yeah, I really did dig this scare zone. I know it's weird because I was worried about it, but I think that they did a really solid job of putting together interesting, what do you call it, set pieces and different things. And I get that those characters were a little, there wasn't a whole lot of variety to it. It was very much zombie, 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 but it did feel like you were walking through a bayou full of undead zombies, and it is exactly what they were going for. And I think this one benefited from being in the area that it's in.
Yeah.
Um, I think sometimes the scare zone they put in here benefits heavily from this, the setting. So I think that helped quite a bit.
I think so too. I mean, the setting definitely helped it out tremendously, I'd say. All right. Well, if my math is correct, it looks like we have a clean sweep for our number 5 and our number 1 spots. But for my number 1, I had Demon Queens. Is that accurate? Is everybody?
Yeah.
Jamie, was
Yep,
that? Yeah.
I think we did.
So, so we'll just quickly, Seamus, why is it your number 1?
Because it's the most unique of all 5. There was more going on. I think for the most part, the scare actors put in more of an effort in Demon Queens. I think there was more unique parts of it. Like I think out of all 5, it was the one that felt most alive, I guess is the best way to put it. And you wanted to spend time there. You wanted to like leave through Hollywood because you wanted to experience that. So I think that was easily the best scare zone this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It felt like unfortunately they knew they didn't have a lot to work with. Like they didn't have the props or like these giant. They had the stage in the middle, and that was kind of it. And it felt like they knew that, so they gave 1,000% to like bring it to life, and they made it feel. When I went into that area, when I went to Hollywood, I felt like I was in this different realm, which is what you always look for in these scare zones, which sometimes they accomplish, sometimes they don't. But I felt it here. The little stage show was great. I loved the design of the different queens. I thought that was really cool. But the makeup, the costuming, I really enjoyed it. Jamie, any other thoughts on Demon Queens before we re-give our lists and see how wrong we were before at the start of the season?
Like you kind of said with just feeling like you're in another like dimension or like going through that portal and just being the surreal. I feel like the surreal aspect of the Demon Queen scare zone fit better than the sinister aspect in the Torture Fair scare zone. So I really like that that connected as well. I feel like the lighting and the coloring was all very fun. I feel like compared to the other ones, this actually made you feel like you were walking through a scare zone, and it had cohesion to it. It had good scare actor interaction. Like you said, the costuming and makeup and everything and design was fantastic. And it just, I mean, I don't want to repeat what you guys said, but it's the only one that I feel like we actually wanted to spend time in.
Yeah, yeah. So again, to reiterate, my scare zones 5 through 1. Number 5, Duality of Fear. Number 4, Swamp of the Undead. Number 3, Enter the Blumhouse. Number 2, Torture Fair, and number 1, Demon Queens. And my pre list was Duality of Fear at 5, Enter the Blumhouse at 4, Demon Queens at 3, Torture Fair at 2, and Swamp of the Undead at 1. So I definitely shifted around a lot, except Duality of Fear, I was dead on, and Torture Fair somehow stuck around at that 2 spot. So, Jamie, why don't you go through your list, and then I will tell you where yours ranked
Well,
at the
it was
beginning of
the
the season.
exact same as yours. So,
Oh,
number
it was.
5, yeah, I was gonna, yeah, we had already
Yeah.
discussed. Number 5 was Duality of Fear. Number 4 was Swamp of the Undead. 3 was Enter the Blumhouse. 2 was Torture Fair, and 1 was Demon Queens.
So before, your pre-hype list was Duality of Fear at 5,
Mm-hmm.
Demon Queens at 4,
Ooh,
Swamp
shocking.
of the Undead at 3, Torture Fair
Mm-hmm.
at 2, and Blumhouse at 1.
Yeah, well, really got me
So you
there with the
swapped around a
Blumhouse. I
decent amount
remember,
of
as
stuff.
I say, I remember I had Blumhouse at number 1 though.
Yeah, yeah. So Seamus, your list again, 5 through 1 for scare zones was.
So my scare zone list was Duality of Fear, Blumhouse, Torture Fair, Swamp of the Undead, and Demon Queens.
So previously it was Duality of Fear at 5, Swamp of the Undead at 4, Demon Queens at 3, Enter the Blumhouse at 2, and Torture Fair number 1. So a little bit of a switch up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely changed a lot, I think.
So let's not waste any time. Let's get into the things that people came here for. And that is, of course, houses. So, number 10, I had the museum, Deadly Exhibits, at my number 10 spot.
I
Didn't love
think
it.
that might be
Didn't like
collective.
it. I don't know. I don't know about that. Yeah, let's see. What can I say? I'm trying to think of like ways to be nice about it, but I really disliked this house a lot.
It's okay. You
I
could say it was
disliked
boring.
I disliked it because I think the idea of it is so good and so easy to do. I think a museum haunted house works incredibly well, and this just didn't do it for me. It didn't, for me personally, didn't feel like a museum. It felt like we were just walking from one random room to another random room to another random room. There was little signs and breaks, but even with those, like you go into this like little Viking area or whatever, and it says like Faces of the Fog. Okay, nothing of that screams Nordic Vikings name wise. So like you just don't know what you're in for. I really just did not like this house. And maybe it's because maybe I'm so down on it because I thought it could have been something really cool. But again, it felt like Seamus mentioned earlier, with it felt like they just found props and brought them in. Like this felt very much like, well, go down aisle 12 through 13 and pull some stuff, and then we'll put it in and we'll call it a museum. Like I don't know. It really disappointed me. It did. And again, that's nothing that the characters can do about it. They just were stuck there and they did their part, but like I didn't get the whole bodysuit room, when the people are coming off the walls. Like I get that the rotting stone is making everything come to life, which means the museum is coming to life, but it felt like a cheap hallway. They're like, well, we don't have any props for this one, so you're gonna be coming out from the wall. Like it just didn't fit. I don't know. Didn't like it. Number 10, Museum Deadly Exhibits. Jamie, what is your number 10?
Mine is also museum at number 10.
Okay.
I feel like we didn't have to be, well, I feel like I'm usually pretty optimistic about it, but this house was just boring. And I feel like we did it a lot because it was a low wait time. But it was just terribly boring for me. I feel like it just didn't make sense. Even this, like you were saying, the signs that they had for the different rooms or different exhibits and stuff, you couldn't even read them because you were walking through the house too quick. So I mean, that couldn't really do much. It was cool scenes in different parts, like all the security guards with their heads cut off and the window kind of two-way mirror thing that would pop up. I like that. The Viking room was cool until they added the disgusting fish smell in it to where literally I had to plug my nose walking through it the rest of the times we did it because it was so bad. I don't understand how people said that The Exorcist and all these other smells were terrible in Texas Chainsaw. I think this was, or in Monstros, the Lola Chusa room, I think this one was really bad. And I don't know. Yeah, it just really didn't do it for me. I mean, I know for a fact that this was number 10 on my previous hype list before the event, so I don't think that has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Seamus, you're number 10.
Probably comes to no surprise of anyone, but it's Triplets of Terror.
Triplets? That's crazy, Seamus. Museum over triplets is
See,
absolutely fucking insane.
You said
that house
museum was gonna be a
sucked.
sweep, and I knew that he wasn't gonna love this one.
That house was terrible.
Absolutely
That house was
despicable.
boring. That
Museum
house
was boring.
did nothing for me. I've already said it more than once. It felt like Stranger Things with no name wannabe Texas Chainsaw Killers. It made no sense as to why the kids grew up in the same clothing. Uh, it, it was a cheap excuse to just use as much gore as possible, and there weren't any real good scares in it. So I know that everyone's going to look at me like I'm crazy, but yeah, this house was the one house that did nothing for me. I think I did it 2 or 3 times, and I did not bother me one bit that I didn't do it more. Yeah, this house was awful. I don't, again, it wasn't as bad as Dragons. I
Yeah.
think Dragons holds a special place in my heart for being one of the worst houses I've ever done. But Triplets is it's garbage. It's
You all
wasn't
thought we
good.
weren't gonna mention dragons on this episode.
No, I mean it just, and I said it before. Like if they had kind of stuck with the whole like investigative journalistic thing that they were kind of starting it with, like it felt like, hey, we're gonna tell a story and we're gonna have a podcast, like, and they're gonna explain it to her. We're gonna have people that are investigating, and then they end up getting slaughtered. It just turns into like, I don't know, like, oh look, I don't know. It just,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to explain why I didn't like it, but for me, gore just to have gore is stupid. I would rather have them just done like a Texas house or something. I don't know.
It did
I don't know.
seem like they couldn't or didn't want to get like a chainsaw or
Yeah,
something in that realm, and they're like, well, we don't need it. We can make our own. I can see that.
right.
Yeah. So my number 9, Universal Monsters: Eternal Bloodlines. Story wise, couldn't figure it out. Didn't enjoy it. The resets on a lot of these scares, just it was too long, and it sucks that the best run I had of this house was the final
Was
night.
Yep.
In that I had extra scares. The bungee wolf, I saw her come out and back a bunch. That was the only time during this entire season that I saw the wolf on bungee like full on in my face, which sucks because it's just that's a big moment and a big scare, and to have it with such maybe it was longer than ones in the past, but I feel like there was just a constant reset time. I'd always miss it. And this last one I got, but it just felt like I was either always missing something or they were gone. I don't know. There was a lot of missing holes in this house, and I don't know why, but that was a big reason. And the other reason is that the story, you just couldn't pick up on it. It wasn't, you couldn't figure it out just from a walk through the house. So for me, Universal Monsters: Eternal Bloodlines unfortunately falls at number 9. Jamie, you're number 9.
My number 9 is A Quiet Place. I feel like
Finally, we break from having the same
I
lists.
know, I know. Yeah, I mean, you guys know I wasn't very excited for A Quiet Place to begin with. I thought it was a very interesting choice for an IP house out of the hundreds and hundreds of other choices we could have picked, but that's okay. It was still something different. I will give it the benefit of the doubt. The first room that they had with the dark hallway and the puppet animatronic Angel of Death. Is that what they're called, those creatures? Nick, correct me
Yeah,
if I'm
Death
wrong.
Angels.
Death Angels, thank you. That was very cool. I really enjoyed that. And they did play well on the quiet aspect in the house. It was definitely one of the more quiet haunted houses we've had in Halloween Horror Nights, which I was glad they were able to execute, but just not enough scare actors for me. Puppets and animatronics are cool to an extent. It's kind of disappointing when it's the whole house. I'm sorry, the house was kind of up to par with some of the different movie scenes. Like I said, I've only really seen the first one and some of the second one, so couldn't really line it up that well. But overall, it just didn't really do much for me in that sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
Seamus, you're number 9.
My number 9 is like you, Monsters Bloodlines. You kind of hit all the beats that needed to be hit, but that house was also boring. Story made very little sense, and again, I know I'm not a monsters guy, but unfortunately,
You
I
like
was
Van
looking
Helsing
forward
though,
to
which
this one.
sucks.
I felt like this one. I think there were some really cool ideas that they were trying to go for, but I feel like it just unfortunately fell super flat and was not um, wasn't what I think they were going. It just didn't hit with me. Didn't
Mm-hmm.
resonate with me.
Which sucks because I know you've been looking forward to like a Van Helsing
Mm-hmm.
style
Yeah, and I wanted
storyline.
Van Helsing. Like I liked the idea of having Van Helsing in it, but yeah, the story just didn't make any sense. And we talked about it before when we started the episode. Like, I feel like if Van Helsing had been like the supporting character to a monster's house, it would have worked. But
Mm-hmm.
making her the star of the show, and at the end of the day, having her die at the end, like it just, I don't know, it just wasn't what I expected from it, and
Yeah,
it sucks because last year I liked Unmasked so much that
they were on
yeah,
like
I
a
don't know
redemption tour
yeah.
for you. But I'll swing over to me. My number 8. My number 8 is A Quiet Place. Um, I like the characters. I'm not huge on the puppetry. The IP itself wasn't one that I was like, I enjoyed the movies, but I was very cautious on how they would adapt this into a house, and they kind of, I don't know if they did what I thought they could do, but I think that they did about as good as they could have done with this house. That little entrance, though, I mean that hallway where it's like deadening sound, amazing. I wish that there was more of that throughout this house, but the whole fact of mostly puppetry work, I think the scenic was really cool. The characters that I saw were really good, but again, puppet after puppet after puppet is just not going to do it for me, unfortunately. So for that, I have A Quiet Place at my number 8 spot. Jamie, you're number 8.
My number 8, sorry, my laptop was being kind of funky for a minute. So let me pull my list back up. My number 8 is Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of the same thing you guys went over. I know I've harped on this one before, so we don't need to go too much detail into it, but just characters I'm not familiar with that I couldn't really relate to. I mean, I should have, and that's the thing too. I wish, and I feel like I was expected to really enjoy this house being a female and having the all female cast and everything, and which was great, and that was awesome. But it just didn't resonate with me, I guess, as being one of my favorite monster houses since we've seen so many other good ones in the past with characters like, even though Nick calls him Seagrade, the Invisible Man, who I love, and just stuff like that. So I just wish that the storyline was presented a little bit better in the house versus you having to listen to the podcast episode if you wanted that more detail or more insight on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Seamus, you're number 8.
My number 8 is Museum.
Okay.
Um, we've talked about it before. I don't think I hated it as much as you guys did.
That
I
was
can
being
respect
nice.
I respect and understand your opinions on it. I felt like it was them trying to do something different, not really hitting on it as much as they probably thought they would. But at the same time, I didn't find it nearly as egregious as everyone else. So I enjoyed it for what it was. Could it have been done better? Probably, but you know, I at least I give him I give him A for effort on it.
I give him a C minus for effort. Number 7. My number 7 is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Um, I really and I do want to say I think there is a pretty big gap between my 10 through 8 and my 7 through 1 because I did really enjoy going through Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I had great scares. I had great interactions with these characters. I had one of the probably scariest times I've had in one of the houses when I went through Ghostbusters. I went through one night, classic HHN night with me and Jamie. It gets towards the end around 1 o'clock and she's ready to go and I'm ready to do houses. So I'm like, why don't you go get some food and I'm going to go do a bunch of houses as much as I can really quick. Um, so I did Ghostbusters and I was by myself and I walked past the containment unit room into the room where everyone's kind of escaping. And I opened the doors and all I could see was blinding blue lights. And I was like, damn, what the hell is this? I don't remember this. And I'm like pushing through. And then I pull back a second and Garaka's face is inches away from my face. I was like, oh, what the fuck? And then they pull back and I was like, oh, that was so cool. And then all the ghosts and monsters came out at the same time and got me. And then the librarian or whoever's on the left, the librarian, I think, comes out and chased me out of the room. Like they were coming out of their boo holes into the pathway. And it was just so cool. But 7, again, I think there's a gap. So I really did enjoy it. I think that they kind of paid us back a little bit for some of the stuff that we were missing in past houses of the Ghostbusters. We didn't have the Ecto one and stuff like that. So I enjoyed it. But Jamie, you're number 7.
My number 7 is also Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. As much as I'm not a huge fan of this franchise in particular, I did think this was a really fun house. I thought it was pretty spot on with the movie, and I did like all the other Easter eggs and little nods to the first and second Ghostbusters as well. A lot of little like detailed things to look at in this house, which I enjoy. The temperature play I thought was good, but I agree, Nick, with how you said earlier that it could have been a little bit colder in the house.
Mm-hmm.
But the frozen room that they had, the first like kind of dining room scene that you walk in with a little hand on the rotator for the
The
I keep wanting to call
phonograph.
I I keep wanting to call it a xylophone. the phone the phonograph, yes. I think that room is one of the coolest rooms I've seen in a house in a while, so I did really enjoy that. But not that this is a bad house, but I feel like it just got that number 7 spot just because some of the other ones were a little bit more enjoyable for my taste per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Seamus, you're number 7.
My number 7 is A Quiet Place.
Quiet place.
I definitely was hoping for more. I think it's upsetting because I thought it was, hey, let's try something really different and try to nail, different types of scares, more offbeat types of scares, and they just didn't. It just didn't hit.
Yeah.
It was fun to kind of enter that world, but like Nick said, it was heavily reliant on puppetry. And although I respect and appreciate the puppetry because I think it's really cool to put those big set pieces together, doing it too much kind of takes away from what makes a house special. So, enjoyed it for what it was, but at the same time, definitely not something I'd want them to do again.
Yeah, they tried something new and I'll commend them for that, but it just I again back to our earlier discussions of like cheaping out. It felt like maybe the puppets cost that much, but like I felt like you could have just paid for. I would prefer just scare actors than puppets. My number 6, Triplets of Terror. I have it right there. It's on the outside of the top 5. I enjoyed it. I think that there's a lot missing from this house. I think that they could have told this story a lot better. Seamus's commentary that they grew up wearing the same clothing is funny, ridiculous, and extremely true. How did that little boy grow into the same pair of overalls and fit when he was 4'3" all the way to him being 6'7"? It's a unsolvable question that we'll never figure out. But I enjoyed it. I had some pretty good interactions with them. I'll concede to the point where Seamus said there's not many scares. It's really not. Um, I wish it was a little bit longer and pulled that story out more. That hallway of the podcast room was essentially pretty useless, I'd say, because it doesn't tell you the full story and they don't narrate throughout the entirety of the house, which I think would have been better. Look at something like Case Files, where they did that. Every time you'd kind of go into a new segment or a new room, you would get that audio overlay of, June 16th, 1934, something like that. You had no idea to know you were in different decades through these houses or these rooms. Sorry. I think that they fell a little bit short in the storytelling, but for me, I did enjoy it a little bit more than others. So, Jamie, you're number six.
My number 6 is Monstros, the Monsters of Latin America,
Okay.
which kind of almost rounded out my top 5. I just feel like I had my hopes very high for this house, and they were, I don't want to say diminished, because I really did enjoy it, especially after doing our unmasking tour and gotten to see all the little details and everything. And of course, I love the big animatronic La Lechuza that we got from Hollywood. Super sick to see that in person. I'd seen videos, and it's immaculate. The structurally, and just the design of it, super cool. But I just feel like overall, I didn't really get many scares in this house, which kind of sucks. Like, maybe little ones here and there, but I feel like that scare factor just wasn't there for me. And I feel like with
Hmm.
the top 5 that I have, because I do very much enjoy this house, and the theming of it and everything was great, and it was a very pretty house too. But I just feel like the other ones did a little bit more for me and executed the scares a little bit more for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
Mhm.
So, Seamus, you're number six.
My number 6 was goblins. Surprisingly enough,
Oh, okay.
I
Goblins
think that it did what it was going. It accomplished what it was going for. I think it was fun. I think it was different. I think that it was not dragons, which was nice. It actually made a lot of sense. Goblins were having a feast and you're for dinner. And that's all you really needed with that. It doesn't take very much to tell that story. So it worked really well. Again, not a very scary house, but doesn't have to be. Wasn't what I was going for. And the hand was working. So,
They got it moving.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Not my favorite house of all time, but it's definitely fun and it hit certain beats that I was looking for. So yeah, that's why I put it just under top 5, but kind of right there in the middle.
All right. All right. So let's get into our top five then. Number five for me was Monstros, the Monsters of Latin America. I enjoyed this house. It had missing pieces, like all these things are seemingly this year, but I enjoyed it for the most part. I did feel brought into the story. I did like that they divided it. It gave it a nice continuity. It gave it a good like chapter one, chapter two, chapter three sort of feel. The ending definitely killed it for me, and I agree, Jamie. It should have been a lot scarier. I didn't
Mhm.
feel as in my face scares as I had anticipated, being
Mhm.
that this was Hollywood's House of the Year. Animatronic was cool. I did enjoy seeing that, but then again, that goes more to the point of it felt, I know it's not cheap of a product, but the fact that we just got this big product brought to us by somebody else, it did feel
Mhm.
a little bit of a cop out,
Right.
sort of. But I enjoyed it. It was a fun house, and I'm sure at some point I will miss it. But right now, I don't miss it entirely too much yet. So, Jamie, you're number five.
My number 5 is Major Sweets Candy Factory. I feel
Wow,
like I know, I feel like even though it's top 5, it feels like it's a little low saying it
hater,
out loud too.
hater.
No, not a hater. Um it's and I feel like this just comes down to the nitpickiness of it too, of which house I enjoyed doing more throughout the nights that I was there. I feel like I don't know how to explain it. I feel like it's not I don't have any bad things to say about these next couple houses. Other than in Major Suites, I maybe, even though it did still seem pretty long, I wish it could have been a little bit longer. Maybe I wish they had it in a different um, facade or a different structure. I could see it being maybe better suited something like that. Even though the industrialness of the old Fast and the Furious did work well with the with the candy factory theming. So I don't know. It really just comes down to me liking these other houses more than this one. But I feel like in this house that kind of stuck out from the others for me, other than my number one. I feel like these scare actors in this house, and not being biased because one of my friends was in there, but I feel like they all just really killed their role every single night. It was just always like having fun with their role, still being scary, kind of chaotic, and it really, the scare actors made the house what it was.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
So Seamus, you're number 5.
So my number 5 is Ghostbusters, which would not have guessed going into the season. Was not looking for this to do anything for me, and it was one of the better houses this year. Although it only really delved into the latest movie, I think what they did with it worked really well. I agree with Jamie that that frozen room in the very beginning might be one of the better rooms they've done in recent memory. It plays on a few different things. It plays on that cold, that feeling. So you get all the senses are attacked in this house. Best stilt walkers at the event this year,
Mhm.
and it's just fun. It's just sometimes it's just fun to like get lost in a movie you like. You know what I mean? Like
Oh, I know.
getting lost in a movie that you're really kind of like you remember from your childhood or you just tend to be a fan of. Um, but I think this house was just fun. I think it just worked kind of like Goblins. It's kind of why I put Goblins and Ghostbusters right next to each other because it was like not going to get scared in this house, but that's not the intention. I'm supposed to just enjoy myself, have a really good time, and it did exactly that. Plus, I'm a sucker for big, goofy, recognizable puppets like um, like the oh my god, Slimer
Slimer?
puppet, which
Slimer,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
yeah, it was really really cool. So I dig it.
yeah. I don't have any bad things to say about it. So my number 4. This is where I think people are going to start getting shocked a little bit. My number 4, Slaughter Cinema 2. I have it at my number 4 spot.
And you said
Wow.
I'm a hater? That's crazy.
I thoroughly enjoyed this house. I just
You like the
I
first one better.
No, wasn't even going to bring up the first one. I found myself enjoying my walkthroughs of the ones that are above it a little bit more.
Yeah.
These top 4 are in another category comparative to the ones that are below it. I think 4 through
Mhm.
1 were pretty hard to narrow down for me, but I really enjoyed it. I loved going back to the Cary Drive-In. I love that we brought the theater aesthetic back again, back to the point of it feeling a little cheapish this year. They rolled out the same thing that they did for 1. So, but I thought that these were really good, but I didn't love every single one of these rooms. There was a couple that stuck out. I liked Mardi Gras Murders. I liked Hatchet and Chains. But I didn't really love the clowns. I didn't really love the not the xenomorphs, but the
The Zyborgs.
Cyborgs. I didn't. It just
I
felt
like
like
them.
I was in laser tag. I loved Blood and Chum, but I just wish there was more. Mummy Strippers was great, but again, I kind of wish there was a little bit more. But that's why it's at number 4, so it's not. There's nothing bad about it, that's for sure. But I I, I enjoyed it, but it looks like Jamie went MIA. So Seamus, we'll jump to you to your number 4 for right now.
So my 4 is Major Sweets.
Wow. Okay.
Um, I liked it. I think it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It felt like it was a callback to the Scare Zone, but also doing its own thing. Very unique. My cat's destroying my desk. Very unique scenes. Nothing felt overused or it did what I think we were looking for. I like the idea of putting in interactive elements to it, so the audience like us can play with it, so the buttons and that sort of thing. Um, but I think really it just turns out that the 3 that are on this list above it, I just enjoyed more so. So
Yeah. Yeah. So Jamie, then back to you for your number 4.
Sorry, had to plug in my laptop. But my number 4 is Triplets of Terror. My
High.
Not surprising.
only
No,
my
not surprised at
only
all.
thing for this house, because I did enjoy it. I really didn't mind that they didn't delve into the podcast episode of it, or of like that kind of it. Excuse me. I feel like it kind of reminded me of like the, what is the name of the, is it the Spirit Seekers from
For
like
like the
the
legendary truth.
Legendary Truth
Oh,
and stuff like that? I feel like it definitely would have turned into something like that, which would have been too samey for me. So I'm kind of glad that they didn't really go into it, because I feel like with something simple as that, I mean, it's three siblings killed their family on their birthday. They come relive and do the same thing. I feel like it's a pretty simple story to follow, which is good in that aspect. I did
yeah.
think it had some good scares, Seamus. I don't know. Maybe you just didn't have a good couple runs, but I feel like there's a couple good double scares in that house that specifically stood out to me. And I thought it was really, even though I didn't like the dead dog in it, the dead dog kind of sucked and made me sad on the dryer. But just the little details too, like the happy birthday and the intestines when you kind of walk after that laundry room and stuff like that. And then um, walking out through kind of like the trailer park looking area, I guess, or like
Mhm.
outside when she pops out from the door. It just felt, yeah, I know, I love it. I just thought it was really fun. It was kind of cheesy. It was kind of campy. I really enjoyed it, and I was looking forward to this house. And it definitely did what it was supposed to do. I feel like wasn't over the
Yeah.
top. Didn't need to be. Still had some of the gore aspect, and yeah, I liked it.
Remember, murdered humans, totally fine. Murdered puppy,
Different
same
Not
story.
story.
okay.
Different story.
Not
Kill all the children you want. Kill all the people you want.
Was it eat
Not a
babies?
problem.
Doesn't matter. Just don't hurt my puppy.
No.
Yeah. All right. So top three. Here we go. Number 3, Goblin's Feast. I
That's
had so much.
crazy.
I had so much fun going through this house. I loved it.
So
It's
much
not
fun.
scary at all. I loved the characters. And okay, I say not scary at all, but there's that little hallway where I forget where it is, but you get kind of all the big ogres and they all congest on you at once. There's like 4 characters in one area. There's one time I was looking at one on my right and he was waving and he just pointed to my right, and I looked to my right and the other guy was right in my face. I was like, oh, okay, that was a good one right there. But it blended comedy and fun and a little bit of horror in there perfectly for me. I never had a bad run. These characters went balls to the wall every single time. They gave it their all. They were having fun, and that's what it's all about. I enjoyed going into this house. Anytime it was towards the end of the night, I was like, all right, I just kind of want to go to the back because I know the amount of times I did Goblin's Feast 2 or 3 runs back to back to back was probably like 3 or 4 nights throughout the season, just because there was no line there. So I was like, why not go back to the feast? I had such a good time with it. But that's why it's at number 3 for me. So Jamie, you're number 3.
My number 3 is also Goblin's Feast. For being someone who doesn't enjoy fantasy and goblins and ogres and that kind of stuff, really, I had an absolute blast in this house. I don't want to just go off everything you said, Nick, but you pretty much nailed everything on the head. I feel like all the scare actors were having a great time in this house. There was some good scares in it. The detail, it was just, especially after doing our tour too, just noticing everything. I keep harping on it, but the first room that you walk into with the big pot and cauldron and stuff like that, and kind of before you get into that through the tavern, just the window pane ceiling that they have with like the herbs and the plants hanging from it with like the moonlight coming through, it just all looked so cool. It was so well done. I just wish that, I know you'd mentioned it before with these new tents, that they would have extended it a little bit. I feel like they had room to do more with it, even though I understand they're still getting the kinks worked out and everything. It was the first time utilizing them, but overall, this was a really fun house. I caught myself doing this house a lot of times throughout the season, and I feel like it kind of ended up being that blood moon for me, that I would always have very low weight, but still always be a very good run every time. So, yeah.
Yep. No, I agree. So Seamus, you're number 3.
My number 3 is Monstros.
Nice.
I really did enjoy this house. I know that we've talked about it. The ending is weak, but I don't think the ending took away from it that much for me. I think everything else was just extraordinary. It really well put together. I know that it was a borrowed house technically, so it wasn't like we were getting anything new or unique, but
Come on.
I think that each monster was great in its own way. They were very different from each other. It wasn't samey. Um, and that animatronic at the end of it is just, it was crazy, like incredible. One of the best things I've ever seen them do.
Mhm.
So I think it really totally did exactly what I thought it would do. And I like the stories. I think the stories are very unique and different. Like I'm kind of over like doing the same things over and over and over again. So getting some different ideas or stories from different cultures and experiencing um, at different aspects of horror are great. Plus, I like a little bit of controversy. I'm not going to lie. So,
Right.
eating babies pisses
Sure.
people off. Good. I'm
Why
glad.
not? That's what horror is supposed to make you feel. It's
Right.
supposed to make
Exactly.
you
You're supposed to be
unsettled,
pissed off about it.
right? All right. Number two, Major Sweets Candy Factory. It was a close one. I had it at one for a while. I really did. And I just couldn't, I really couldn't do it. But I love this house so much. I had so much fun with it. It was my first house of the season. It was goofy. It was energetic. It was in your face. It was colorful. It was gross. Like, I just had such a fun time with it. They had guest activated triggers. Again, the characters in this house were just insane. Like, there was one girl in this house that, like, I felt like she came out like spin kicking every single night. She was just like going insane. The guy with the dark hair who was on the control panel room with like the guest activated trigger was always just like screaming in your face like, I want candy, ah, sticking his tongue out. And it's just like, this is amazing. Like, high energy. Cast was on fire. I loved this house so much. I'm very much so gonna miss this house. But Jamie, you're number two.
My number two goes to Slaughter Cinema 2. So, this house, when we first got the announcement for it, I was very excited since I did not get to do the first iteration of it. And I pretty much feel like this house was made for me. I love anthology horror, compilation horror, and stuff like that. And I feel like it was literally walking through a bunch of different cheesy B grade and C grade horror movies with differing storylines that I enjoyed. I feel like they all were different enough from each other that it made for good set design, different character designs. The facade for this, I think, which was fun. I feel like this year the tents didn't get as much facade work as they have in the past year, so I feel like the drive-in aspect was nice. It felt like old HHN when you would have those films and different like little clips playing before the houses when you would go in it. I think I did get some good scares in this house, but I feel like overall it was more of a fun house too, that I just had a good time going through. And this was ended up being our last house of the season, so I'm glad we did that one because it was a really good run.
Yeah, it was up there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
But Seamus, you're number two.
My number two is Slaughter Cinema 2 as well.
Mm.
This house was great. And I never did the first one, so, take that for what you will. But I thought this house was great. I love compilation houses. I love compilation movies. I love, getting cool little vignettes throughout it. Not everyone was great. I think some of them are weaker than others, but I didn't hate any of them. I just felt like there were better ones than others, but all in all, it was still an incredibly fun house. Definitely one that was worth waiting for.
Mhm.
And I think it just kind of gives you what you're looking for when you do a house like that. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot else I can say about it. I've been kind of singing its praises the whole season. So, if you never got a chance to do it, I feel for you because it was definitely worth the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that leaves us all with number one. And I think on the count of three, we can all say it. And in one, two, three,
Insidious.
Insidious.
Yeah, Insidious was pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, it was all right.
What a joy of a
I mean,
house.
who wants to kick this off? I mean, who wants to sing the praises on Insidious?
I mean, I've
I
done it
mean,
27 times, so why not do it more? Just the scares, the literally movie quality facade, the amount of energy the scare actors had every single night and every single run you'd done through this house, the amount of scare actors period in this house, I feel like this was such like a loaded house. The length of it, it was long, it was dark in the right places, it had good scare. I just can't even. There's so much thinking about it now and looking on it back now that I know I'm forgetting, but wow, this is what I needed. This is what I look forward to with Horror Nights, is with houses like this, and especially for someone who enjoys IPs, and for this winning House of the Year as an IP is just so wonderful to me because I really got to feel like I was walking through the further with Elise guiding me, guiding our way, and Patrick Wilson somewhere hiding in the crevices. But
Go to
this house,
hell.
it just really did it for me, and the the red faced demon is that what we would call it? The lipstick demon, the red faced
The
demon, whatever
lipstick
you want to
demon.
call him. I don't know why, and I know people have noticed it, and I don't know why I haven't seen anyone talking about it because it's fucking hilarious. But the fact that he had a bush was just even fucking funnier, and just made
What the
me kind of
hell? It's
like,
got a bush.
what the hell? It's got a bush. But I feel like that just gave that. Oh my god, Boots. Jesus, gave that kind of comedic relief after getting the shit scared out of me. So I feel like that was nice too. But even the ending of this house, like I just feel like they did so well in the double and the triple scares. You'd be looking one way and you'd have a hand in your face the next, or you'd have the bride in black and right around the corner, and just you weren't safe anywhere. And it was great. I loved it.
This house was relentless. It had all the scares. It did scares well. It reinvented the way they do haunted houses here by putting that mannequin room up front and in the back.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
just, any kind of scare, they took what they tried to do with phantom scenes in Unmasked last year and perfected it in this year in those curtain rooms by giving them 3 to 4 boo holes and making it feel like there was 10 scare actors in there when there was really 3. Like it was just top tier stuff. Seamus, anything else on Insidious?
No, I mean, just you guys kind of hit. You said it right. This house was above and beyond anything that any of the other ones did. It was scary in all the right ways. It felt like it took forever to get through. You're asking yourself all the way, every time you did it, when is this going to end? And that's a good thing, like, because sometimes it feels like they do kind of go too quick. So this one, it's just I didn't expect that an IP was going to affect me as much as this one did. And I had this low on my hype list. I think I just had this like 9 or 8 or 9 on my hype list. It was low.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's incredible. It was just an incredible house, and I think there's so much to like about it, so much to sing praises about. And I think that if they can nail something close to this next year, it'll get the same reaction.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'll go through my list and then I'll give you what I had before the season. So number 10, I had the Museum, Deadly Exhibits. 9, Universal Monsters, Eternal Bloodlines. 8, A Quiet Place. 7, Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire. 6, Triplets of Terror. 5, Monstros, The Monsters of Latin America. 4, Slaughter Cinema 2. 3, Goblin's Feast. 2, Major Sweets Candy Factory. And number 1, Insidious, The Further. And going into the season, oh boy, I have to go find my list again. Pause please, because now I gotta scroll because the page I was on didn't want to load anymore. Scrolling back through everything we posted this year. God, we posted too much. Going into the beginning of this year, I had Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at my 10, A Quiet Place at number 9. I had Goblin's Feast all the way at 8. Oof, I was wrong. Museum was at 7. Insidious was at 6. I definitely underestimated that. 5, I had Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. Overhyped it. Triplets of Terror was at number 4. Slight overhype. Monstros was at 3. Major Sweets was at 2, which stuck the landing. And Slaughter Cinema was at number 1 going into the season. So, Jamie, let's go through your list 10 through 1.
So at number 10, I had Museum Deadly Exhibits. Number 9 was A Quiet Place. 8 was Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. 7 was Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. 6 was Monstros The Monsters of Latin America. Number 5 was Major Sweets Candy Factory. 4 was Triplets of Terror. 3 was Goblin's Feast. 2 was Slaughter Cinema. And 1 was Insidious.
You had a
And I
couple
have
change
my
ups.
house. I have my house list pulled up if you want mine too. Unless
Oh,
you have it pulled up already.
I have it right here. So
Oh, good.
at
Perfect.
number
Perfect.
10, you had Museum Deadly Exhibits. At number 9, you originally had Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
Moved
Number
up.
8 was Goblin's Feast. That
Also moved
grew.
up.
Number 7, A Quiet Place. Number
Mm-hmm.
6, Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. Number
Mm-hmm.
5, Major Sweets, which stayed the course.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 was Slaughter Cinema 2. Number 3 was Triplets of Terror. Number 2 was Monstros. And number 1 was Insidious.
Had a lot of hope for
So
Monstros.
a lot of switch ups there. So
Yeah.
Seamus, your list 10 through 1, sir.
My list was Triplets of Terror, Monsters, Bloodlines, 8, Deadly Museum, or whatever it was called, Museum, 7, A Quiet Place, 6, Goblin's Feast, 5, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, 4, Major Sweets, 3, Monstros, Monsters of Latin America, 2, Slaughter Cinema 2, and number 1 was Insidious.
Yeah, going into the season, you had Ghostbusters at number 10. You had Triplets at 9, Goblins at 8, Insidious at 7, Monsters at 6, Major Sweets at 5, A Quiet Place at 4, Museum at 3, Monstros at 2, and Slaughter Cinema at 1. So you had a lot of surprises here for you this year. This
Yeah,
was a big switch
I
up
think
for you.
a lot changed for me for sure.
Yeah. So that was a lot of changes for us. So we do have quickly. We have a couple more. We have a couple call-ins. We'll get to those because I promised to do that.
Go ahead.
I know we're running late, but this is the monster
Oh,
recap
Nick.
episode. So yeah, we're just gonna run with it. So let's see what we got here. Gotta pull it up right. This app never wants to do it correctly for me.
I just saw you guys' Instagram post of what my thoughts are about HHM and the houses. I think this year was great. And my top houses, my favorite house was in between Ghostbusters and Slaughter Cinema. I loved them both. If I was going to rank the houses, I would say Deadly Jam at 10, Triplets of Terror at 8, The Candy Factory at 9. I would say Insidious is definitely in the top 3. Trying to think. What was the other houses? Sorry about that noise. That's just the background. I think Quiet Place at number 4. I would put The Monsters House at 5. I would put Goblin's Feast at 6. I'd put Monsters at 7. And that's my list. And my username is NoToast32 on TikTok and on Instagram.
Yeah, it was a little hard to figure out where the lists were at because it was all in kind of random order. So I hope it was kind of more like, I don't know. I hope it lined up to ours. I think we had similar thoughts. You had Insidious in your top 3, and I think that was pretty well agreed upon as well. So let's get into the next one here real quick.
Hey guys, it's Donovan. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. This year, was not it for me. In my opinion, this year and 2022 are kind of similar, where like half the houses were kind of just like mediocre or like mid in a way. I think Insidious was great, and honestly, it's probably gonna be in like one of my top 10 favorite houses of all time. Ghostbusters better than 2019 in my opinion. The sets were better, and it actually was a pretty scary opening night. Quiet Place, I think it was cool opening night. It was very like it was probably my favorite house opening night besides Insidious. But the more I did it, the more I got a little more repetitive, and the puppets just didn't do it for me anymore. Slaughter Cinema, I think it was fine compared to like the original. The original was like I think my second favorite house ever. This one was fine, and the shadows like too big of a shadow to really make it shine in a way. Major Sleep I thought was a fantastic house. That one was great. I want to see more tempty houses like that in the future. But that's about it for like the good houses. I'm super excited for next year's speculation to start. I think Legacy said something about like 2 of the IPs are already being talked about, and I think he said something about it being like more bringing more hype and stuff, something along those lines. I can't remember specifically, but yeah, half the houses this year, like the museum, 2 back houses. I know you guys like Goblins. It didn't really do it for me that much. I think the house was too short. It did have that triple scare, which was great though. But yeah, here's the hoping for Silent Hill and Terrifier. Keep it up, you guys. Much love.
Thanks for calling in, Donovan. I did see Legacy start posting some stuff, so I think we'll discuss speculation. Once we get a little bit closer to the not closer, but I don't know how much it treads water right now, but yeah, Goblins didn't really do it for you, huh? All right, let's get into our last call in before we get on out of here.
Hey guys, this is Rachel from Virginia. I've been to HHN for 3 years in a row, and this year was definitely my least favorite. I feel like it was lacking in some areas. Like I didn't necessarily get a Halloween vibe when I was walking around the park, like something was missing. Sinister and Surreal are my least favorite icons thus far for sure, and the food seemed last minute, like it just wasn't as tasty as it had been in the previous years. However, on a bright note, the scare actors were phenomenal in the zones and in the houses. I really did love most of the houses. In fact, almost all of them were really, really good. With that being said, Insidious was my favorite house this year. Thank you guys for a great podcast and keeping us updated and informed. Listening to podcasts for me is a big part of the HHN experience. Hope to see you guys in the fall for HHN 34.
Well, I appreciate you including us in your HHN world. It definitely is a part of it for us, and we're glad we can be a part of it for you. I think a lot of stuff
You're
that
totally
you said
right.
we kind of agreed upon earlier, but with Sinister Surreal, it did feel a little shoehorned in at times. But all right, I think we talked enough for tonight. I know Jamie's getting antsy. I could talk for hours, but
I am.
I think it's time
if you're watching the
wrap.
video.
I think it's time to wrap this up. We're almost at 2.5 hours, but we got some cool stuff coming for you. This is our final rankings episode, but we have our award show coming up. That'll probably be next week. We have our way too early HHN 34 speculation that we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. Shutter Sundays are on the way back. They will probably be up and running in December, but we'll get more into depth on that about probably next week or so. We'll have a better idea of how that's going to work and look at everything. But I don't even have to ask if there's any final thoughts. I know nobody's got more thoughts. We've talked this thing through, so let's just sign off. Let's get on out of here. But until next time, this is Nick.
This is Seamus.
This is Jamie.
Happy haunts.
RIP 33.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Fear and Beer, a Halloween Horror Nights podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on whatever streaming platform you are listening to us on. You can find us on all of our socials at Fear and Beer Pod.